Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. It was a little after 5 in the morning when I saw it. The sun wasn't fully up yet, just a dull orange glow behind the hills. I'd gotten up early to check on the east pasture because a storm had rolled through during the night, and I wanted to make sure the fences held. The rain had stopped around 3, and everything was damp, the air cool and quiet. I've lived on that ranch outside of Fallon my whole life. My dad ran cattle before me, and now it's just me and my wife, Cheryl. We keep about 40 head of Angus, and I know every inch of that land, every tree, rock, and rut in the dirt road. That morning, something looked wrong right away. From the kitchen window, I could see a dark patch in the middle of the field that wasn't there the night before. At first, I figured it was just a puddle reflecting the sky or a shadow from a low cloud, but the shape of it didn't look right. Too round. Perfectly round. I grabbed my jacket and boots, poured some coffee in a travel mug, and headed out. The ground squished under my boots, soft from the rain. The cattle were quiet, all bunched near the western fence line, which was strange. They usually wander. When I got close enough, I saw the patch wasn't water. It was a circle of scorched grass, maybe 40 feet across. Everything inside it was black, completely burned down to the dirt. Not like fire scorch marks that fade unevenly. It was exact, a clean ring. In the center stood one of my cows, Millie, perfectly fine. She was standing still, head low, breathing slow. Her fur wasn't singed, her hooves weren't burned. Nothing. She looked at me when I approached, and for a second I swear I could feel a faint vibration in the air, like a low hum you hear more in your chest than your ears. It was there, then gone. I checked the ground. The burned area didn't smell like smoke or ash, more like hot metal. There were no tracks, no footprints, no sign of a lightning strike. The rest of the field was untouched, just wet grass and muddy hoof prints leading up to the edge of that ring, stopping right at it. I walked around the circle twice, trying to make sense of it. I touched the ground at the edge, and it was warm. Not steaming, but definitely warmer than the surrounding dirt, even though the air was cold enough to fog my breath. I tried to lead Millie out, but she wouldn't budge. She wasn't panicked, just planted, like something in her was telling her to stay put. After a few tries, I left her there and went to check the power lines that run along the back fence. I figured maybe a transformer had blown during the storm, sent a surge down into the ground. But when I got there, all the lines were fine. No broken poles, no downed wires. The metal gate latch, though, caught my attention. It was sticking to my glove. I thought it was just wet, but when I pulled back, my knife handle, metal, snapped against it and stayed stuck. That's when I realized it was magnetized. I went back to the barn and started checking other things. The pitchforks, the nails in the tool bench, even an old wrench half buried in the dirt. Everything metal clung together like it was under some kind of charge. My truck keys stuck to the hood. The horseshoes nailed to the beams had shifted slightly like they were being pulled toward something. I went inside to tell Cheryl. She thought I was exaggerating until she tried it herself with a spoon from the drawer. The handle clung to the fridge door. She looked at me with that face she makes when she's worried but trying not to show it. We went back outside together around 6:30. The sun was up by then, cutting through the morning haze. The burned ring was still there, dark and sharp against the rest of the field. Millie was still standing dead center. When we got close, she started to shake her head like there were flies around, but there weren't any. I finally got her to move by rattling a grain bucket, and when she stepped over the edge of that circle, she let out this low, uneasy bellow like she'd been holding it in. The ground under her hoofprints was normal, soft, damp, but when I knelt and picked up some of the burned soil from inside the ring, it was dry and crumbly like it had been baked. I rubbed it between my fingers and noticed the faintest shimmer, like bits of metal dust catching the light. I took a magnet off the side of my workbench later and held it near that soil. The dust jumped to it. Around 9, my neighbor Tom came over. He's retired Air Force and doesn't spook easy, but even he just stood there for a long minute, arms crossed, shaking his head. He said it didn't look like any kind of fire he'd ever seen. The edges were too clean. He suggested maybe ball lightning, though I've never heard of it leaving something that perfect, or magnetizing metal. We checked the cows again. Every one of them had their tags still in place, but some of them wouldn't go near that part of the field. They stayed clustered together, eyes on it like something was still there. Later that afternoon, I tried to start the truck. The engine clicked once, then died. Same with the ATV. The batteries weren't dead, they just wouldn't turn over. My phone compass started spinning when I walked near the barn. Even my watch was off by about an hour, though I couldn't figure how. By sunset, the magnetism started to fade. The tools didn't cling together as much, and my truck finally started, though the radio made this strange static, like a low pulsing tone that didn't match any station. That night, Cheryl and I sat on the porch. The air was clear, cool again, and the stars were bright. We didn't talk much. Around 10, I saw a faint light moving above the tree line on the far end of the property. Slow, silent, steady. Not like a plane. No blinking, just a white point gliding low across the horizon. I got up to get a better look, but it disappeared behind the ridge without changing speed or direction. When I checked the field the next morning, the burned ring was still there, but lighter, like it had started to fade overnight. Millie was fine, acting normal. Everything metal had gone back to behaving the way it should. For a few days, I tried to come up with some explanation. Electric surge, static discharge, something. But I couldn't stop thinking about how warm the ground was, and how the grass wasn't just burned, it was gone, evaporated. The soil in that ring never grew anything again. I tried reseeding it twice, once that fall and again in the spring. The grass around it grows fine, but that patch stays bare, like something sterilized it. I kept a few of the soil samples in a jar in the barn. If you shake it, you can still see the fine metallic dust move like it's drawn to the glass. I've shown it to a couple people, but no one's had much to say. It's been over a year now. Millie's still with us, healthy as ever. The other cows don't mind that area anymore, though sometimes when the wind dies down and the air goes completely still, they all look toward that spot at once. Not scared, just alert. And sometimes in the early mornings before sunrise, when everything's quiet and I'm walking the fence line, I think I hear that low hum again. Not loud, not constant. Just a faint vibration hanging in the air, like it's under the ground, waiting for something. We were camped about half a mile from the rim of Palo Duro Canyon, in this little primitive site my dad had found years ago. It wasn't an official campground, just a flat patch off a dirt access road, tucked between mesquite and scrub oak. We'd gone out for a long weekend, me, my dad, and my sister Katie, just trying to get away for a bit. It was early September, hot in the day, but cool enough at night that you could sit by the fire without sweating. That Saturday night, the air was completely still. Not a cloud anywhere. You could see the canyon cut stretching out forever to the south, nothing but dark ridges and dry air that smelled like dust and cedar. We'd finished dinner around 9, roasting hot dogs and burning half of them, and were just sitting around the fire talking. Dad was half drunk on Coors and telling the same story he always told about seeing a mountain lion near Caprock in the 80s. Katie was scrolling through her phone trying to get a signal. I remember she stood up and walked a few feet toward the canyon edge, holding her phone out like she was going to catch a stray bar of service floating in the wind. That's when she said, "Hey, what's that?" We all looked toward where she was pointing. At first I thought it was a plane, just a bright white light dropping through the sky at an angle. But it was moving way too fast, and it didn't blink. It came down from high above, steady and smooth, until it looked like it was about level with the canyon rim, maybe a mile out across the valley. Then it just stopped. I mean, completely stopped. No sound, no movement, just hanging there in midair like someone had paused it. Dad said something like, "Probably a helicopter," but he didn't sound convinced. There weren't any red or green lights like aircraft usually have, and it wasn't making any noise at all. It was brighter than anything I'd ever seen in the sky, white, but with a faint bluish edge around it, kind of like an LED light. We watched it for maybe a full minute. Then it drifted sideways, slow and perfectly level, maybe 50 feet, and froze again. Katie started filming with her phone, but when she did, the light seemed to fade a little, like it dimmed itself. Dad walked toward the truck, mumbling something about getting the binoculars. He always kept a pair in the glove box. While he was gone, the light started moving again, downward this time, straight into the canyon. It didn't dip or wobble, just lowered itself like it was following an elevator shaft. After a few seconds, it disappeared behind the ridge. The sky went dark again, just like that. Dad came back holding the binoculars and asked where it went. None of us said anything for a second, and then he laughed, like we'd just been tricked by headlights. But I could tell he was uneasy. He kept scanning the canyon, whispering to himself. Around 10 minutes later, the coyotes started. Normally that sounds comforting, distant, natural, but this time it came from everywhere at once, echoing off the canyon walls. It was sharp and fast, like they were startled. Then it cut off all at once. Total silence. Even the insects stopped. Dad looked at me, eyes wide. "That's not right," he said quietly. We stayed up another hour, top just staring at the horizon, hoping it would come back. It never did. When we finally went to bed, I could still see that bright white afterimage burned into my vision, like when you stare at a camera flash too long. I woke up around 3 in the morning. The air had gotten cold, maybe in the 50s. The fire had burned down to glowing coals. I was half asleep, but I noticed a faint glow through the tent wall, bluish white, same color as the light from earlier. I sat up, unzipped the flap, and looked out. There was a dim reflection on the truck's metal, like something shining from below, from the canyon direction. It wasn't bright enough to see clearly, but it flickered softly, almost pulsing. I considered waking Dad, but it faded before I could say anything. I sat there for a few minutes, waiting for it to come back, but it didn't. The next morning, Katie asked if I'd seen it too. She'd woken up around the same time, apparently, and noticed a weird blue haze through the trees. Dad said he hadn't seen anything, but he was already dressed and packing up, like he'd been awake for hours. After breakfast, he said we should hike down a little way before heading out. There's an old service trail that leads from our site toward the rim. We followed it maybe a quarter mile until we came to this overlook, a flat area of rock and dirt with a view straight across the canyon. From there, you could see a patch of ground below that looked completely different from the rest. A big, dark rectangle, maybe 30 feet long and 20 wide, sitting right on the valley floor. At first, it looked like a shadow, but it didn't move with the sun. When we walked down closer, we saw it wasn't just discolored. It was scorched. The soil was black and brittle, like it had been burned in a fire. The edges were perfectly straight. No gradual fade or irregular outline, just a clean rectangle, the corners sharp as if someone had cut it out with a ruler. Dad crouched and touched the ground. It was warm. Not hot, but definitely warmer than the air around it. We hadn't had rain or lightning in days. There was nothing nearby that could have caused a burn that big. No tire tracks, no footprints. Just this silent, dark shape pressed into the earth. Katie took a few pictures. They came out normal, no glare, no weird distortion. But when she tried to send them later that afternoon, her phone wouldn't connect to anything. The photos didn't even show up in her gallery until the next day. We stayed down there maybe 10 minutes. None of us talked much. The air smelled faintly metallic, like a burnt circuit board. The wind coming off the canyon was hot, even though the rest of the day was mild. On the way back up the trail, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that light again. Nothing. Just the same clear sky, pale and harmless. When we reached the campsite, Dad didn't even sit down. He said, "Let's pack it up," and that was that. He didn't sound angry or scared, just tired. We drove out before noon. Later that night, when I finally checked my phone, I saw I'd missed a bunch of time-stamped messages from friends between midnight and 2 a.m., a group chat that was active when we were all asleep. My replies were blank, like I'd sent empty bubbles, just nothing inside. Katie texted me a photo of the scorched ground that evening. It looked darker in the picture than I remembered, and if you zoomed in, you could see that the dirt wasn't evenly burned. It was patterned somehow. Not symbols or writing, just faint cross-hatching, like something heavy had pressed down and then lifted straight off. A few days later, Dad called and said the binoculars he'd brought were acting strange. The lenses were fogged over from the inside, and when he tried to clean them, one of the internal pieces had cracked. He said it smelled like ozone. He didn't say anything else about that night, and I didn't push. We've been back to Palo Duro a few times since, but never that site. There's no trail marker anymore anyway. The access road's mostly grown over. Sometimes when I'm driving late, I'll see aircraft lights in the distance and feel that same unease, just waiting for one of them to stop moving. I keep telling myself it was something ordinary, a flare, a drone, maybe even some kind of test flight. But that rectangle, I don't know how to explain that. It was too clean, too exact. Like whatever came down there wasn't just light, it was weight. Something real, if only for a second. It happened in late October, right after daylight savings kicked in, so it was getting dark earlier than I was used to. I was living in a small town in Illinois then, a quiet, middle-of-nowhere kind of place with a single main road, a few blocks of houses, and a grocery store that closed at 9. I didn't have a car at the time, so I walked most places. My apartment was about 15 minutes from work, down a long, straight street lined with old streetlights that gave off that dull yellow glow, instead of the bright white kind. That night, I left work a little after 9:30. It had just started to drizzle, not enough for an umbrella, just that light mist that sticks to your hair and jacket. The air smelled like wet asphalt, and the only sounds were the soft hum of the streetlights and the occasional car passing on the highway 2 blocks over. I remember thinking how empty everything felt. It wasn't cold yet, maybe 50 degrees, but the air had that stillness that comes before winter, where you can hear your own footsteps echo. About halfway home, I noticed one of the lights ahead flicker. Just a quick blink, like a power surge. Then the next one down the block did the same thing. I slowed down, thinking it was just coincidence or maybe the rain messing with the wiring. But then it happened again. Not random this time, but in order. The light directly in front of me flickered off first, then the next one, then the next, all the way down the street. They didn't come back on. I stopped walking, thinking maybe I'd imagined it. But when I looked up, the whole stretch of road in front of me was dark, every single light out. Behind me, everything was still lit. My shadow stretched forward a little, fading into the blackness ahead. I stood there listening, as expecting to hear a transformer buzz or maybe a car engine, something to explain it. Nothing. Just rain hitting the pavement and the faint hiss of power lines overhead. I took a few steps forward. The second I crossed under the next pole, that light went out too. Quick, like someone flipped a switch. I froze. Looked behind me. The lights I'd already passed were still on, casting a soft yellow glow on the wet road. I turned back forward, pitch black. My first thought was that it was some weird motion sensor thing, but I'd walked that road every day for months. They'd never done that before. I tried calling my landlord. He worked for the town and handled utilities sometimes, but my phone didn't have a signal. I held it up, waved it around, nothing. Then, right as I lowered it, the next light down the street flickered off, like it was waiting for me to move. It wasn't windy. There wasn't thunder. The lights were dying one by one, in perfect order, keeping pace with me. I turned around. The ones behind me were fine. I stared at them for a second, trying to decide whether to keep going or turn back. Then I heard this faint, low hum. Not loud, not mechanical, more like when you stand near a big subwoofer and you can feel the vibration in your chest. It came from ahead, from the darkness. I thought maybe there was a truck idling down there or a generator running, but the sound wasn't steady. It pulsed, almost like breathing. I backed up a few steps, and the nearest light, the one I just walked under, blinked back on. Just that one. Then another one farther down flickered. Then another. They were coming back on in the same sequence they'd gone off, but this time they were coming toward me. By the time the light right in front of me buzzed back to life, I turned and started walking fast. Not running, just trying to get to the next intersection where there were houses. Every few steps I'd glance behind me and I could see the lights turning off again, now going in the opposite direction, chasing me this time. I reached the corner of Lakeview Drive and stopped again. That intersection had a big metal stoplight post. the kind that hums quietly from the power running through it. I stood under it, catching my breath, watching the street behind me. The rain had picked up a little. Everything shimmered under the few remaining lights. All at once, every single light that was out came back on. Not gradually, just a sharp click and glow, the whole street bright again, like nothing had happened. The hum was gone too. The air felt normal again. I stood there a few minutes, half expecting them to go dark again, but they didn't. A car turned onto the road behind me, headlights cutting through the drizzle, and I felt stupid just standing there. So I kept walking. When I got home, I took off my jacket and shoes, sat down on the couch, and finally checked my phone again. Full signal. The time said 10:47. The walk usually took me 15 minutes, maybe 20 tops. It didn't feel like I'd been out there that long. I didn't think much more about it that night. I told myself it was a power thing. Maybe the rain shorted something out. But the next evening when I left work, I noticed something strange. That same row of lights, the ones that had gone out, looked dimmer than the rest. They were still on, but the glow was weaker, uneven, like the bulbs had burned halfway down. When I passed under them, I could hear a faint crackling sound, almost like static. The other lights didn't make that sound. I told myself I'd report it to the city if it kept happening, but I never did. Mostly because I didn't want to explain what I saw. I figured they'd just think I was confused, or exaggerating. About a week later, I was walking home again. Clear night, no rain this time. The air was colder, crisp enough that I could see my breath. I was halfway down that same street when I saw a small shape up ahead, right where the lights had gone out before. Looked like someone standing near the curb. At first I thought it was just a person walking their dog, but they weren't moving, just standing there. As I got closer, I realized they were facing the opposite direction, toward the lake. I thought about calling out, but something about the way they stood didn't feel right. Their posture was too still, like they weren't breathing. I crossed to the other side of the street, keeping my pace steady. When I passed the spot where they'd been standing, I glanced back. The sidewalk was empty. The next morning, on my way to work, I looked again. There were no footprints on the damp grass, no sign anyone had been there. That was about 6 months ago. I don't live in that apartment anymore. I moved closer to the city for a new job. But every once in a while, if I'm walking somewhere at night, I catch myself glancing up at the streetlights. I know it's stupid, but part of me expects them to start flickering again. One thing that still sticks in my head, though, a few days before I moved, I had to stop by the town office to sign off on my old lease. While I was waiting, I overheard one of the guys in the utilities department talking about the streetlight maintenance schedule. He mentioned they were replacing a section on Maple Avenue, the same street I used to walk. He said they'd been having signal interference in that area, something about the current spiking without warning. The weird part was, it only ever happened around 10 at night. They couldn't find a cause. He said it was like something was drawing power, then releasing it all at once. It was around midnight, somewhere in southern Oregon, on my way up to visit my brother near Portland. I'd been driving since late afternoon, trying to make good time through the boring stretch of I-5 where the trees all look the same and the exits get farther apart. I wasn't even that tired. I'd stopped for coffee about an hour before, but I had to use the bathroom. So when I saw a rest stop sign, I pulled off. The place was empty. Just one of those small highway rest areas with a couple of vending machines, a water fountain, and 2 squat concrete buildings for restrooms. The parking lot lights were harsh and buzzing, throwing big moth-shaped shadows on the ground. There was one car parked way down on the far end, an old white sedan with fogged-up windows, but no one inside that I could see. The air was cold, maybe mid-40s, and the kind of damp that clings to your clothes. I remember locking my car even though I didn't really need to. It was quiet except for the faint hum of traffic somewhere in the distance, and the occasional click of the cooling metal under the hood. The bathroom lights were that pale bluish color that makes everything look washed out. Inside, it smelled like cleaner and damp concrete. The air was warmer than outside, but it had that stale, sealed feeling, like it hadn't been aired out in a long time. There were 3 sinks under a long rectangular mirror that stretched the length of the wall. 2 stalls, 1 urinal. The floor was shiny with old mop water. Nobody else was in there. I was at the sink washing my hands when I noticed the sound. It wasn't loud, more like a faint electric buzz, but different from the fluorescent hum. This was higher pitched, almost like static, and it seemed to move around the room. I turned off the faucet and listened, but the sound stopped right away. When I looked back up at the mirror, that's when I saw it. In the reflection on the ceiling behind me, there were these tiny points of light, maybe 6 or 7 of them, all in a loose line gliding slowly across the ceiling tiles. They looked like pinholes, but bright, pure white. Not like a reflection from my phone or anything. I didn't even have it out. I turned around fast. The ceiling was just a flat grid of acoustic tiles and metal trim, the same dull gray as every rest stop in the country. No lights moving, no glow, nothing. I looked back at the mirror, and the dots were still there, drifting a few feet farther along, smooth and silent. I tried to find the source, thinking maybe a car had pulled in outside and its headlights were reflecting through a vent or something, but the bathroom didn't have any windows. Just a solid metal door with a narrow gap at the bottom. I turned again, scanning every corner of the room. It was empty. No sound but the soft dripping from one of the sinks. I stepped back from the mirror, keeping my eyes on the reflection. The lights were still moving, slowly curving upward toward the far corner, like they were following an invisible path. The weird thing was, they didn't project onto the ceiling itself. They only existed in the mirror. I waved my hand in the air behind me. Nothing. In the mirror, though, my hand passed right through them, and for a split second the lights wavered like ripples on water. That static sound came back, just for a moment, louder this time. I felt it more than heard it, like pressure in my ears. I backed away until I hit the opposite wall, not taking my eyes off the mirror. The lights had stopped moving and were just hanging there now, evenly spaced in a faint arc. My first thought was maybe there was some weird reflection trick happening, hidden LED indicator lights or something, but there was nothing else in that room that could have caused it. Then one of the dots flickered out. Just gone. A second later, another one dimmed and vanished. The remaining lights shifted slightly, like they were reorienting themselves. Then they all began to move downward toward the bottom of the mirror, slow and smooth, almost too steady to look natural. The pressure in my ears grew stronger. The buzzing turned into a low hum that made my teeth ache. I reached for the door handle, but my hand was shaking so bad I missed it the first time. When I finally pushed the door open, the sound cut off instantly, like someone flipped a switch. Outside, the air felt thin and sharp. My car was the only one left in the lot. The white sedan was gone. I stood there for a minute, just breathing, trying to decide if I should go back in and look again. I almost convinced myself it was some optical illusion, bad lighting, my tired eyes, whatever, but something about the way the hum had stopped the moment I stepped outside didn't sit right. I got in my car, started the engine, and sat there with my headlights on the bathroom building. The lights spilling through the door made a bright rectangle on the pavement, perfectly still. Nothing moved inside. I waited maybe 5 minutes before I put it in gear. I pulled out slowly, checking the mirrors like I always do before getting back on the highway. That's when I noticed something else. My dashboard clock was blinking 2:16 a.m. I knew for a fact it had been just after midnight when I stopped. I'd checked my phone when I parked because I'd been timing my drive. 2 hours. The engine was still warm, like I hadn't been parked that long, but I'd only been inside for what felt like 5 minutes. I drove for a while after that, keeping the radio low just to have some sound in the car. The whole time, I kept catching faint flickers of light in my rearview mirror. Not headlights, more like brief pinpoints that flashed and vanished before I could focus on them. I pulled over once, thinking maybe there was something wrong with the glass or my eyes, but there was nothing there. The sky was clear, stars bright, no aircraft, no distant lights on the horizon. I made it to my brother's place around 5 that morning. I didn't mention any of it at first, not until later that day when we were sitting outside having coffee. He said he'd driven through that same stretch of highway a few months earlier and stopped at what sounded like the same rest area. He didn't see any lights, but he said his phone had gone completely dead while he was there. Not just no signal, but powered off, even though it had been fully charged. That stuck with me. A week later, on my way back home, I thought about stopping again just to check, but when I reached the exit, the sign was covered with a big orange tarp and cones blocked the turnoff. Looked like the whole rest stop was closed for maintenance. When I passed it, I looked through the trees. The buildings were dark, no lights on anywhere, no cars. Just that same white glow from the parking lot poles, flickering faintly in the drizzle. For a second, I thought I saw movement in one of the mirrors near the door, a faint glint like metal catching light, but then the trees blocked the view, and I was already back on the highway. I didn't stop again after that. It was a Thursday night in late August, and I was driving home from a job site about 2 hours outside of Flagstaff. I work maintenance for a small construction outfit, so I'm used to long drives and late nights. It was close to 11 when I finally got onto the stretch of Route 180 that cuts through the desert. Nothing out there but scrub, a few barbed wire fences, and the occasional herd of cattle behind them. The air was still and hot even after dark, and the sky was clear. No clouds, just that heavy dark blue where you can see every star. I was maybe 45 minutes from home when I first saw the lights. At first I thought they were distant aircraft, maybe military since we're not far from an Air Force training route. 3 white points in a perfect horizontal line, way up ahead, above the highway. I didn't think much of it. Planes, stars, who knows. But a few minutes later I noticed they hadn't moved. Same distance apart, same brightness, same angle above the horizon. I slowed down a little, maybe from 70 to 60. The second I did, the lights seemed to move too, drifting backward like they were matching my speed. I squinted through the windshield. Could have been an illusion, sure, but it didn't look like one. The spacing between them was exact, like you could measure it with a ruler. I turned down the radio to listen, which is stupid, because sound doesn't travel that far, but something about the quiet made me uneasy. All I could hear was the hum of the tires on asphalt and the faint whistle from a loose window seal. After a mile or so, I tried testing it. I pressed the gas again, and the lights moved forward, keeping their same distance above the road. I slowed down sharply, down to 55, and they eased back, staying just far enough ahead that I couldn't get any closer. That's when I realized how dark the desert really was around me. No headlights in the rear view. No cars coming from the other direction. Just me, the road, and those 3 white lights hanging over it. I remember thinking maybe it was some kind of drone formation, but 3 drones flying in complete silence, perfectly spaced with no visible blinking. It didn't make sense. I rolled the window down and leaned out, feeling the warm air rush by. It smelled dry and dusty, like sagebrush. The lights didn't flicker or hum or move side to side. They just floated, perfectly still relative to each other. A few minutes later, I came up on a rest stop, just a single bathroom building and a couple of vending machines. I decided to pull in, half because I needed to use the bathroom and half because I wanted to see if the lights would stop following. I braked and turned off onto the gravel shoulder. The lights slowed too. That made my stomach drop. I parked by the bathroom building and stepped out of the truck. The desert was quiet. No wind, no bugs, just stillness. The only sound was the crunch of gravel under my boots. When I looked back toward the highway, the lights had stopped moving entirely. They hovered maybe 100 yards down the road, low over the asphalt. Still 3 of them spaced evenly apart. I walked around to the back of my truck and just stared for a minute. I don't know why, but it felt like they were waiting. I could feel this weird pressure in the air, like before a thunderstorm, except the sky was totally clear. My chest felt tight, not from panic, but from the heaviness of the air itself. I pulled out my phone to take a picture. The screen showed nothing, just darkness, no matter how I adjusted the focus or brightness. When I looked back up, they were still there. I went into the bathroom building, figuring maybe I'd take a minute to gather myself. The fluorescent lights inside flickered hard when I turned them on. The mirror was cracked, and the sink barely dripped water. I splashed some on my face anyway, trying to shake off this weird sense that I shouldn't be there. When I came back outside, the lights were gone. Just gone. The sky was dark again, stars all over. I let out a shaky laugh and told myself it must have been planes or something atmospheric. Maybe the angle just changed. I got back in the truck, shut the door, and sat there for a second with the engine idling. Then I noticed something. The inside of the cab felt warmer than it should have. The air smelled faintly metallic, like hot wires or ozone after lightning. My old truck, has an analog clock on the dash. I glanced at it, then checked my phone for the time. They didn't match. The dash clock said 11:27. My phone said 12:04. I hadn't been stopped that long. That threw me. I checked the time zones, same one. Maybe my truck clock was just off, but I'd synced it that morning. I shook my head, put it in gear, and pulled back onto the highway. A few miles later, I saw them again. Same 3 lights, same formation, only now they were behind me, high above the road, following. I kept checking the mirrors, hoping they'd fade out like plane lights do when you move away from them, but they stayed exactly the same size and distance apart. Every time I turned onto a curve, they adjusted perfectly, like they were locked onto me. I drove for maybe 20 minutes with them back there. I didn't want to stop again. My hands were sweating on the wheel, and I kept telling myself I was overtired, seeing reflections, anything to make sense of it. When I passed through Valle, the lights finally peeled away. No movement, no fade out, just gone. The sky went normal again, with regular stars and the faint glow of the town ahead. I got home a little after 1. My porch light was still on, and everything looked normal. I sat in the truck for a while, engine running, listening. Nothing. When I finally went inside, my phone started glitching. The time froze at 12:30 seconds before about 30 seconds before jumping ahead to 1:02. I didn't sleep much that night. Over the next few days, I drove that same road twice more, during daylight and once after dark, hoping to see something again, even just to prove to myself I'd imagined it. Nothing. No lights, no sounds, no weird feeling in the air. But the thing that stays with me is the way those lights reacted. They weren't random, and they weren't drifting naturally. They moved with intent, like they were aware of my speed, my direction. Sometimes when I'm driving home late, I'll catch a glimpse of distant headlights or planes and tense up, waiting to see if they'll start matching me again. They never do. Still, every once in a while, when the night's clear and the desert's dead quiet, I get the same tight feeling in my chest, like the air's just a little heavier than it should be, and I find myself checking the mirrors, scanning the sky, half expecting to see those 3 perfect white lights keeping pace, just far enough away to stay out of reach. I must have only meant to close my eyes for a minute. That's what I told myself when I woke up, anyway. The last thing I remembered was pulling over on that empty stretch of 97, just outside Klamath Falls, because my eyelids were getting too heavy. It was close to midnight, and I'd been driving all day from Boise. I parked in a wide gravel turnout by the tree line, engine running, heater on low. I figured I'd rest for 10, maybe 15 minutes, then finish the last hour to my cousin's place. When I opened my eyes again, the first thing I noticed was the cold. My breath fogged against the windshield. The engine was off, but my hands were still on the steering wheel like I'd never moved. The radio was on, sort of. It wasn't playing music or static, just this low humming tone, almost like when a speaker buzzes even though nothing's plugged in. I looked at the dashboard clock. 4:13 a.m. It didn't make sense. I'd stopped around midnight. The car key was still in the ignition but turned off. I checked my phone. Battery dead. I must have fallen asleep longer than I meant to, but that didn't explain the engine being off. I never turn it off when I nap in the car, especially not in November when it's that cold. For a few seconds, I just sat there trying to get my bearings. It was quiet outside, too quiet. Even the wind seemed gone. My headlights were off, but the dash lights gave off a faint glow. I reached to turn the key, but the car didn't respond. No click, no turnover, just that dull hum from the radio, still steady and even, like a single note held too long. I turned the dial, but it didn't change. The hum stayed. When I looked out the windshield again, something about the light seemed wrong. The world wasn't dark. It had this faint silver tint, like the kind of light you get under a full moon. But there was no moon, no stars, just that same gray wash over everything. I cracked my window to listen. The air was cold and still, and there wasn't a single sound. No crickets, no wind in the trees, no highway noise, just that hum, faint but somehow filling the whole car. I opened the door and stepped out. The gravel under my boots crunched loud, too loud. It was the only sound. My breath hung in front of me, and I looked around. My taillights reflected off something low to the ground behind the car. Wet pavement, I thought, but when I crouched down, I realized the road surface was dry. The reflection wasn't coming from that. It was this faint sheen, like heat shimmer, only colder. I don't know why, but the air felt thicker out there, like humidity before a storm, but the sky was clear. I checked my watch. It read 12:11. I thought maybe the car clock had glitched out. But when I pulled out my phone to compare, it wouldn't even power on. I decided I just needed to get the car started and get moving. I climbed back in, turned the key again. Nothing. The hum got slightly louder when I touched the dial, like it was responding. Then, just for a second, it cut out completely. The silence that followed was so sharp it made my ears ring. I glanced in the rearview mirror and froze. The turnout behind me wasn't empty anymore. 3 faint lights hovered in a loose triangle above the road, white but dull, like someone shining flashlights through fog. They weren't headlights, not high enough, and they weren't steady. They pulsed in this slow rhythm, bright, dim, bright again. I turned around in my seat, trying to see where they were coming from, but the trees made it hard to tell how far away they were. Maybe 100 yards, maybe more. I waited for the sound of an engine, but there wasn't any. The lights didn't move closer or farther, they just hung there. I thought maybe it was someone parked across the road, their lights reflecting weird through mist. But there was no mist. I could see every outline of the pines in perfect detail, just bathed in that pale gray light. After a minute or two, the hum started again, quiet but rising. It seemed to come from the air itself, not the radio. The lights blinked in time with it, 1, 2, 3, then back again. I don't know how long I sat there watching. At some point I realized my fingers were gripping the steering wheel again, even though I hadn't started the car. I told myself to leave, to drive away, but I couldn't make my body move. It was like being half asleep, aware but detached. Then, just as suddenly as they appeared, the lights drifted apart, breaking the triangle. One moved upward, fast, then disappeared completely. The other 2 dimmed until they were gone. The hum faded with them. Everything went normal again, like someone flipped a switch. The silence broke. The wind started moving through the trees. I heard a far-off truck on the highway. My headlights flicked on by themselves for a second, then off. The dash clock blinked, reset, and showed 4:14. When I turned the key, the car started right away. The radio came back to life mid-song, some late-night classic rock station. I just sat there, engine idling, trying to make sense of what happened. I drove off, slowly at first, headlights cutting through that weak dawn light. I looked in the mirror a few times, but the turnout was empty. I kept driving until I hit a gas station 20 miles out. When I pulled in, the guy behind the counter asked if I'd been out all night. I told him yeah, sort of. He said he'd just seen the sky flicker about an hour earlier, like a power surge. I didn't say anything back. When I went to plug my phone into the charger, it powered on instantly, full battery. The time showed 4:17, but when I checked the car clock again, it said 8:23. The next morning, when I got to my cousin's place, I parked in his driveway and just sat there for a bit before going in. I noticed a faint line of dust on the hood, except for 3 evenly spaced clean spots, like fingerprints, only too far apart for a person. I didn't mention it to him. I didn't mention the hum or the lights or waking up with my hands locked on the wheel like I'd never moved. But for the next few nights, I kept waking up at 4:13 a.m. on the dot, no matter when I went to bed. And sometimes when the house is quiet and I can't sleep, I think I still hear that low tone somewhere behind the walls. Not loud, just steady, like the radio never really turned off. We were hiking the Ridgeline Loop in northern Arkansas that weekend, me and my friend Owen. It's not a tough trail, but it's long, about 12 miles total. We'd started late in the afternoon because it was too hot earlier, and we figured we'd camp overnight halfway through, then finish in the morning. The forecast had called for clear skies and a cool night, so we didn't think much of it. We reached the halfway point around 8:30 p.m., just as the last light was fading. The air smelled like damp earth and pine, and the only sounds were the usual night noises: crickets, a few owls, distant wind through the trees. We set up camp beside this small clearing not far from a creek. By 9:30, we had a small fire going and were sitting on logs, eating trail mix and joking about how many ticks we'd probably have by morning. It was quiet, peaceful. Then, out of nowhere, we heard this faint humming sound, not mechanical, but low and steady, like a vibration. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. Owen stopped mid-sentence and tilted his head. "You hear that?" I nodded. It seemed to come from downhill toward the creek. We figured it was water echoing off the rocks at first, but the pitch stayed exactly the same. It didn't fade or move with the wind, just this steady tone sitting somewhere in the dark. We stood there for a minute, trying to pinpoint it. Then Owen grabbed his flashlight. "Let's check it out," he said. We left the fire burning low and followed the narrow path down toward the creek. The woods there were dense, oak and hickory mostly, and the moon was just bright enough to see the outlines of the trees. The sound didn't get louder, but it stayed constant, like it was keeping pace with us. When we reached the bottom, the sound stopped. Just gone. No fade out, no echo. Total silence. We stood there for a few seconds, both waiting for it to start again. Then Owen's flashlight beam swept across the water, and I saw something on the opposite bank. At first, I thought it was a reflection. A white light hovering about 10 feet off the ground, perfectly still. But the creek was dark and still. No ripples, no glare. This wasn't reflecting off anything. It was there, just above the brush, glowing faintly like a frosted glass bulb. It wasn't huge, maybe the size of a basketball, but the edges were so clean it looked unreal, like it didn't belong in the same world as the trees around it. The light didn't flicker or pulse, it just glowed, solid and even. Owen whispered, "What the hell is that?" I didn't say anything. My brain went straight to drone, but there was no sound. Nothing mechanical, no propeller whine, no movement. We stood there, staring at it for what felt like a full minute. Then it began to drift sideways, slow and deliberate, weaving through the trees. It didn't bump into anything. It just glided smoothly between branches that should have been in its way. I remember thinking that if it were a person holding a lantern, I'd see shadows or the outline of someone moving, but there was nothing. Just that floating white sphere. Owen started walking toward the creek like he was hypnotized. I grabbed his arm. "Don't," I said. He didn't argue, but he didn't step back either. We watched as it moved another 20 feet, then stopped. Then it tilted, or at least the light shifted like it had turned toward us. My chest tightened. I felt it. Not just fear, but this weird pressure, like the air around us got heavier. Everything went quiet, even the insects. Owen raised his flashlight and pointed it at the sphere. The moment the beam hit, it didn't illuminate it like you'd expect. Instead, the beam bent, literally curved toward the sphere, like the light was being pulled in. We both froze. The beam wasn't straight anymore. It bowed inward and disappeared right before it reached the object. "Do you see that?" Owen said, voice shaking. I nodded, too stunned to answer. He moved the flashlight a little to the side, and the beam stayed bent, still drawn toward that thing. It was like it was warping the light somehow. Then, without warning, the flashlight went out. Total darkness. Owen smacked it against his hand, thinking it was dead. Nothing. I pulled mine out of my pack and turned it on, but it flickered and dimmed immediately, like the batteries were draining. I aimed it toward the sphere again, and the same thing happened. The beam curved, bent toward it, then cut out completely. That's when the humming came back. Louder this time, and deeper. It felt like it was vibrating in my chest. The light started moving again, closer now, but still slow, steady. The sound grew thicker, almost physical. I could feel it pressing on my ears. "Back up," I whispered. We stumbled backward up the slope, trying not to trip over roots. I glanced back once and it was following, not fast, but deliberate, gliding right between the trees like it was locked on us. The air felt wrong, heavy and charged, like the seconds before a lightning strike. My skin prickled all over. We made it halfway up the hill when Owen's backpack strap snagged on a branch. He cursed, yanking at it, but his movements looked sluggish, like he was moving underwater. The sound was louder than ever, this thick, steady tone that made it hard to think. I grabbed his arm and pulled, and for a second everything blurred. The air around us shimmered like heat haze, and there was this sharp, metallic taste in my mouth. Then, just like that, the sound cut off. When I looked back, the sphere was gone. No sound, no light, nothing. The woods were dead silent. We ran the rest of the way to camp. The fire was barely glowing, just embers now. Our watches said it was 2:14 a.m. That didn't make sense. It had felt like maybe 30 minutes since we'd left the fire. We didn't say much after that. We just threw dirt on the coals, packed the essentials, and hiked back to the trailhead with our headlamps flickering the whole way. Neither of us spoke until we reached the car. When I turned the ignition, the dashboard clock said 5:47 a.m. The sun was just starting to lighten the sky. On the drive home, Owen tried to make sense of it. He said maybe it was some kind of ball lightning or a trick of moisture in the air, but we'd both seen the light bend. We'd both felt that pressure, that vibration that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The next day, I checked my flashlight batteries. They were fine, brand new. I turned it on and it worked perfectly. The beam was straight again. Owen called later that week and said he'd gone back to the trailhead in daylight to see if anything looked different. He said there was a patch of bark stripped off one of the trees near the creek, about chest height, smooth as glass. Not burned, not cut. Just missing. He didn't stay long. Said the place felt off. I've been hiking all my life, and I've seen weird stuff. Fog banks that look like walls, glowing fungus, meteor showers that make you question what you're seeing. But that night on the Ridgeline Trail, the way the light bent, the way it moved, it wasn't like anything natural. I haven't done another night hike since. I tell people it's because of bears or snakes or bad footing in the dark, but it's really because every time I step into the woods after sunset, I half expect to hear that low hum again, waiting somewhere between the trees. It was late August last year, around 9:30 at night, when I saw them. I was staying at my friend's lake cabin in northern Minnesota, Cass Lake to be exact, while he was out of town. He let me use it for a long weekend, said it'd do me good to get out of the city and off my phone. I didn't argue. The place was quiet, sitting maybe 30 yards from the shoreline, and that weekend, the air was heavy and warm, the kind of humid where you can smell the water from the porch. I'd gone out to the dock with a beer after dark, just to watch the lake. The moon was half full, and the water was glassy, perfectly still. You could hear frogs and the occasional fish breaking the surface, but otherwise it was dead calm. I remember checking the time on my phone, 9:24, and thinking how clear the sky was. Every star was visible, scattered like salt. That's when I noticed the orange lights. They were low, just above the tree line across the lake, moving slowly. At first, I thought they were planes, or maybe helicopters heading toward Bemidji, but they were too low for that and too quiet. There were 4 of them, evenly spaced, gliding in a straight line. I watched for maybe 30 seconds before I realized how strange they looked. They weren't blinking like normal aircraft lights. They were steady, glowing like embers. I pulled out my phone and started recording. The footage started fine. I even whispered something like, "What the hell are those?" while zooming in. The lights kept moving across the lake, perfectly level, perfectly spaced. Then the second one in the line rose slightly, and the others adjusted with it, like they were connected somehow, all keeping the same distance. The whole formation paused for a second, just stopped midair. Then they shifted again, this time forming a triangle. The movement was so clean and smooth it didn't look natural. It wasn't jerky, not like drones. It was like watching something underwater, fluid and quiet. I remember feeling this weird pressure in my ears, almost like when you're driving up a mountain and the air gets thin. Not painful, just heavy. The lights started to drift closer to my side of the lake. I couldn't tell how far. Distance is weird at night, but I swear they crossed half that lake in seconds. My heart was hammering, but I kept the phone up, filming. Then, without any warning, all 4 lights went out. No fade, no dimming, just gone. The second they disappeared, the frogs and crickets stopped too. It was like someone hit mute on the whole world. The air suddenly felt colder, and I got that stupid crawling feeling at the back of my neck, like I was being watched. I stood there on the dock, waiting for something, a sound, a splash, anything, but it was dead silent. After maybe 10 seconds, I realized my phone screen had frozen. The timer on the video wasn't moving, even though I was still holding it up. I lowered it and hit stop. Nothing happened. The screen stayed stuck on the last frame of the lights. I tried locking it, but it wouldn't respond. Then, out of nowhere, this sharp popping sound came from the lake, like static from a speaker, but loud and physical. The sound bounced across the water and echoed back from the trees. My phone went black right after that. I just stood there, staring at the spot where the lights had been, not sure what to do. After a minute, the normal sounds came back. Crickets, the wind in the reeds, everything like before. It was as if whatever had happened just reset. I went back inside, plugged in my phone, and waited for it to restart. When it finally did, I checked the video right away. The file was there, time-stamped at 9:27 p.m., but it was shorter than I remembered, only 32 seconds long. I hit play. The first few seconds looked normal. You could see the lake, hear the frogs, my voice whispering. Then the lights came into view, just like before, and right when they started to shift into that triangle, the video cut to black. Then there was this loud burst of static. Not digital distortion, I mean real, full volume static, like when an old TV loses signal. It lasted less than a second, but it was so sharp it made me drop the phone. I replayed it over and over. Same thing every time. Lights, movement, then black screen and static pop. The audio flatlined after that. I sent the video to Owen, my friend who owned the cabin. He texted back, "That's messed up." "You sure it's not a reflection?" I told him reflections don't move in formations. He didn't reply after that. The next morning I went down to the dock again, just to see if there was anything in the water or on the opposite shore. The lake was calm, sunlight bouncing off the surface. Nothing looked out of place. No boats, no debris, no burn marks, nothing. But when I looked down, I noticed something strange. The metal cleat where I'd tied the canoe was slightly rusted the night before. I'd noticed because it had left orange stains on my rope. That morning it looked new, shiny. It wasn't polished. It was like the rust had been erased. The wood around it too. There was a faint gray ring in the planks, like something circular had sat there overnight and bleached the color out. That's when I decided I'd had enough. I packed up, locked the cabin, and drove home. When I got back to Minneapolis, I tried uploading the video to my laptop to see if I could isolate the static or get a clearer frame of the lights. But when I opened the file, my media player wouldn't play it. The thumbnail was just black. The file size was listed as 0 bytes. It wasn't corrupted, it was like it had been wiped clean. I checked my phone again, and the video was gone there too. No trace in the gallery, not even in the deleted folder. Every other photo from that weekend was still there, just not that one. I didn't talk about it after that. There wasn't much to say. About 2 weeks later, though, I got curious again. I searched online to see if anyone around Cass Lake had seen anything similar that night. I didn't find anything in the local papers or Facebook groups, but there was one comment buried in a weather forum from someone in Bemidji who mentioned orange orbs over the lake around 9:30. That was all it said. No pictures, no follow-up. I never reached out. Sometimes I think I should have stayed there longer that night just to see if the lights came back. But every time I remember that sound, that short, sharp pop, I'm glad I didn't. It wasn't loud enough to hurt my ears, but it didn't sound right. It was too clean, too sudden, like it wasn't coming from the air at all, more like it came from inside the phone. I went back to the cabin once more this spring, just to check on the place for Owen. Everything looked the same, except for that patch on the dock. It's still there, that faint, pale ring around the cleat. The wood inside the ring hasn't aged like the rest. When the light hits it just right, it almost looks like it's glowing. I was driving east on Route 36, cutting through the flat stretch between St. Francis and Norton, Kansas. It was late November, about 9 at night, temperature just above freezing. The road was dead straight for miles. No other cars, no lights except the faint glow of my dashboard and the occasional farmhouse way out in the distance. I'd been on the road for a few hours, heading back home to Salina after visiting my sister. The sky was clear, no wind, just that quiet, heavy kind of cold air that settles over empty places. I remember glancing down at my phone, mostly just to check if I had service. I use a magnetic mount that sticks to the vent. It's got a little compass feature built into the GPS app I use. Normally, it points steady, maybe drifts a few degrees when I hit a curve. But when I looked that night, it was spinning. Not fast, but steady, looping in slow circles like it couldn't decide which direction I was facing. I thought it might have been the mount messing with it, so I took the phone off and held it in my hand. Still spinning, it stopped for half a second, pointed north, then started turning again, smooth and deliberate. The GPS itself froze too. The little blue dot just sat there, even though I was clearly still driving. After a minute or so, the navigation voice cut out, and the map turned gray, like it had lost signal entirely. I thought maybe I'd hit some kind of dead zone, but I'd driven that route plenty of times before. Never had any issues. Then I noticed the static. At first I thought it was coming from the radio, but the radio wasn't on. It was a faint crackling, almost electrical, coming from somewhere behind the dash. It wasn't constant, more like waves of it, a short burst every few seconds. I tried rolling down my window to see if it was just interference from outside, and that's when I saw it. Up ahead, maybe a quarter mile down the road, the sky looked off. There was this patch, maybe the size of a small house if you measured it out, where everything shimmered like heat rising off asphalt, except it was cold enough that I could see my breath fogging the windshield. The rest of the sky was still full of stars, but that section wavered and bent, like something behind it was pressing against the air itself. It wasn't glowing or anything dramatic, just a distortion. But the way it moved didn't feel right. It wasn't random, like wind. It pulsed faintly as if it had a rhythm. I slowed down, partly because it was weird, partly because the static in the car got louder the closer I got. The compass was still spinning, faster now, the needle just whipping around in circles. I checked my watch. It was 9:12. When I reached what I guessed was about 200 yards from that shimmer, every electronic thing in the car flickered. Headlights dimmed, dashboard lights blinked, and the power steering gave out for half a second. I gripped the wheel, heart pounding, thinking my alternator was dying, but then everything came back on. The shimmer was still there, except it had changed shape. It looked stretched now, elongated across the horizon, like it was flattening itself against the sky. I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield, trying to see if maybe it was some kind of atmospheric thing, maybe exhaust or mist, but it didn't match anything I'd ever seen. I pulled over onto the shoulder. I don't really know why. Curiosity, I guess, or maybe I didn't want to keep driving toward it without knowing what it was. The static was loud enough now that it felt like a vibration under the steering column. I killed the engine. The sound stopped instantly. I opened my door and stepped out. The cold hit me hard. The night was dead quiet, no wind, no crickets, nothing. The only sound was the soft ticking of the cooling engine. The air felt heavy. Not thick exactly, just dense. Like it pressed back when I moved through it. I looked toward the distortion. It wasn't as clear from outside the car, but I could still see the shimmer, faint and slow, like ripples on water. I walked a few steps into the ditch, trying to get a better angle. That's when my phone buzzed in my pocket. When I pulled it out, the screen was lit but blank. No icons, no text, just white. I held it up and watched as faint lines appeared across the display, like static interference. The compass app opened on its own, and the needle started jerking back and forth again, faster this time, until it froze, not pointing north, but straight up. I don't know what made me do it, but I pointed the phone toward the sky. The white screen flickered, and for a split second the image darkened like it was trying to display something. Then it went black completely. That's when the static came back. Not from the car this time, but from everywhere. It wasn't loud, just pervasive, like the air was humming. My chest felt tight, like when you're standing too close to a transformer. I turned to get back in the car, but before I did, I glanced once more toward the shimmer. It was gone. Completely. The stars behind it were visible again, clear and sharp. The static faded a few seconds later. I got back in the car, started it, and checked the dashboard clock. 9:46. I stared at that for a while. It hadn't felt like more than 10 minutes, but somehow half an hour had passed. The phone was dead. Wouldn't turn on, even plugged into the charger. I sat there for a bit, watching the road. I didn't see any cars pass the entire time. Eventually, I started driving again, slower than before. The compass stayed frozen for about 20 more minutes before it started behaving normally again. The GPS took even longer. I think it finally reconnected near Phillipsburg. I didn't see any more distortions, but something about the sky looked different after that. Hard to explain. The stars seemed sharper, but also off somehow, like they were too still. When I got home that night, the phone finally powered back on. The battery showed 83%, same as when I'd left my sister's place, but the clock was wrong. It said 2:03 a.m. Every app except the compass worked fine. That one kept glitching out for a week afterward. Sometimes it pointed south no matter which direction I turned. Sometimes it just spun like it had that night. I didn't tell anyone at first. I figured it sounded crazy. But a few days later, I mentioned it to my sister when she called to check if I made it back okay. She got really quiet for a second, then said she'd seen something weird too, earlier that same evening. Around 7:30, she'd stepped outside to smoke and noticed a thin strip of light way out over the fields behind her place. Said it looked like a plane at first, but it didn't move. Just hovered there for a few minutes, perfectly still, before fading out like someone dimmed a bulb. She joked that maybe I'd driven under whatever it was. I laughed, but not really. The next week, out of curiosity, I looked up the stretch of highway where it happened on Google Earth. The satellite image was from the previous year. Nothing unusual, just fields, fences, and the road. But when I zoomed in near the mile marker I remembered stopping at, there was a faint discoloration in the soil just off the shoulder. A pale oval patch, maybe 30 feet wide, like the ground had been bleached. Could have been anything, a fertilizer spill, dry grass, whatever. Still, it lined up almost exactly with where I'd pulled over. I haven't taken that route again since. When I visit my sister now, I cut down through Colorado instead. Adds an hour to the trip, but I don't mind. Sometimes when I'm out late driving, especially on those flat stretches where the horizon feels too far away, I'll glance at the compass on my dash just to make sure it's steady. If it ever starts spinning again, I'm not stopping. I woke up before dawn, like I usually do when the wind is still and the sky is just starting to lighten. November mornings in central Nebraska have that kind of cold that creeps into your bones, even under blankets. I rolled over, glanced at the clock on the nightstand, 5:17 a.m., and felt the vibration in the floor before I even opened my eyes. Not from the house, not from a truck or anything like that. Just a low, steady hum, barely there at first, almost like the air itself was singing. I sat up, listening. The hum got louder for a moment, then faded again. My first thought was that it was the wind through the silo vents, but the air outside was still. No movement in the trees, no rustling of the dry grass. I got dressed and went out the back door. My boots crunched against the frost-hardened ground, and that's when I noticed something odd. The cattle were all in the northeast corner of the field, huddled together. Not grazing, not wandering, just standing there, trembling. Normally they'd be spread out, some near the fence, some around the old oak by the creek. But now every cow, all 23 of them, pressed together facing the same direction. Their breath puffed white in the cold air, and the low, vibrating hum came back, just soft enough that it seemed like it was coming from the sky rather than the ground. I called their names. Bess, Clara, Sam. Come on, back to the barn! But they didn't move. Their eyes were wide, reflecting the gray light of early morning. I swear some of them were shaking in time with the hum, though it wasn't rhythmic in the way a heartbeat or a machine would be. I grabbed my flashlight and started walking toward them. The closer I got, the more the sound changed. It wasn't just a hum anymore. It had a metallic quality, like a giant tuning fork vibrating somewhere high above, muffled by clouds. My hair on the back of my neck stood up and my stomach felt tight. When I got to the fence, I leaned on the top rail and shined the flashlight over the field. That's when I saw it, a faint shimmer in the clouds. Not lightning, not fog, just a kind of bending of the light. It hovered low, like it was holding itself up on nothing, and the hum seemed to pulse from it. Every time it pulsed, the cattle shifted slightly but stayed together. I stepped back, shining the light up at the clouds, expecting to see maybe a plane or a drone, something normal. But there was nothing, just that shimmer, wavering slowly. The edges of it looked like heat waves on asphalt, but it was cold. I could see frost on the grass at my feet. I went back into the house to grab my binoculars. My hands were shaking. I don't know if it was cold or something else. When I looked through them, the shimmer wasn't a solid object. It was more like a distortion in the air, faintly reflective, bending the clouds above. I could make out no shape, nothing I could identify. I heard a creak from the barn, then another, like the old boards were settling. The cows didn't flinch, but the hum got louder, almost loud enough to feel it in my chest. My chest was tight, and I could feel a vibration in my teeth when I gritted them. I stepped closer to the fence, trying to call the cattle again. "Come on, girls!" Back to the barn. Still nothing. Their heads all tilted slightly toward the shimmer, ears twitching. I don't know why, but I thought maybe if I shined the flashlight straight up, it might break whatever was holding them there. I did. The beam hit the clouds, and for a moment, the shimmer reacted. It stretched, elongated, almost like it noticed the light. Then it pulled back a little, but not far. Just enough that it wasn't directly above the cattle anymore, still there, still humming. I heard another sound then, a sharp snap, like a wire breaking, or maybe a tree branch under pressure. It came from the edge of the field near the creek. I shined the flashlight in that direction, but all I saw was mist hovering over the water, bending in ways it shouldn't in the calm morning air. The cows were still huddled, trembling slightly more now. Their low mooing started, soft and tense, overlapping with the hum. I stepped closer to the fence again, trying to get them moving, and that's when I noticed the metal tools lying out near the shed. My rake, the pitchfork, even the old wheelbarrow handle, all of them vibrating slightly, like they were resonating with the hum. Not moving, not sliding, just buzzing. I swallowed hard and backed away, my flashlight swinging, and for a moment the hum seemed to intensify. The shimmer in the clouds stretched wider, bending around some invisible form. I didn't see wings or lights or anything mechanical, just distortion, like the air itself had been pulled up. I ran to the truck, my boots crunching the frost, climbed in, and started the engine. The vibration in the air diminished a little when the headlights turned on. I wasn't sure if it was just coincidence or if something about the lights affected it, but I didn't stick around to find out. As I drove down the gravel lane, I kept glancing back at the field. The cows stayed where they were, and the shimmer followed, slowly drifting with me as I gained distance. I stopped halfway down the lane to look again, and it was gone. No hum, no distortion, nothing in the sky except the gray dawn light and some low clouds. I pulled into town later to grab coffee, tried to make small talk with the guy behind the counter, but I could barely get the words out. I told him my cattle were acting funny, just that. Didn't mention the shimmer or the hum. He nodded like he'd seen weirder things than cows acting skittish at dawn. That day, I walked the field, checked fences, checked every corner. Nothing unusual, no scorch marks, no odd footprints, nothing that would explain why all the livestock had huddled together in one corner and trembled. The humming didn't come back, but I couldn't shake the feeling of the air bending that morning, or the way the metal tools had resonated. For days afterward, every time I went out to feed, I half expected to see that shimmer in the clouds again. Never did. I don't know what it was. Never heard of anyone else in the area reporting anything like it. But the cattle, they knew. And whatever it was up there, they weren't wrong to be scared. I still check the sky now, when the air is still, the clouds low and heavy. I don't see anything, but sometimes I swear I can hear it, faint, a metallic pulse that fades into the wind. I woke up to a blue glow filling my bedroom. At first, I thought it was the sunrise, but when I blinked, the light wasn't coming through the blinds. It was all around me, soft but unmistakable. My phone on the nightstand showed 3:17 a.m. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, trying to convince myself it was a reflection from the streetlight outside. But the glow was too uniform, too enveloping. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It wasn't smoke or anything burning, just a faint metallic tang, like ozone after a thunderstorm. My cat Jasper crouched at the foot of the bed, ears back, tail twitching. He hissed quietly when I reached toward him, then stared at the corner near my window like something was standing there. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood, half expecting the glow to disappear once I moved. It didn't. It pulsed twice, long, soft beats, almost like a heartbeat, and then faded into near darkness. My room wasn't pitch black afterward. The corners held a faint bluish tint, as if the walls remembered the light. I checked the window. Outside, the street was quiet, empty. The trees moved a little in the wind, shadows flickering, but nothing looked unusual. No vehicles, no lights from neighbors, nothing. Even so, my gut told me to be careful. Something about the way the light filled the room didn't feel natural. I went over to my desk, trying to shake off the creeping unease. My laptop was open, still logged into whatever I'd been working on before bed. I rubbed my face and shook my head, thinking maybe I'd just had a vivid dream. Then I noticed the sound, or absence of it. Normally at this hour, you'd hear distant traffic or the hum of the refrigerator. That night, everything was dead silent, like the world had muted itself. Even the wind seemed gone. I poured a glass of water and tried to distract myself with the faucet. The sound of running water helped, but it also felt strange. The droplets seemed louder than usual, echoing in a way I couldn't place. When I looked back at the room, the bluish tint lingered along the walls, corners, and ceiling. Not bright, but enough to make everything feel wrong. I decided to check the outlets and lights, thinking maybe some electrical fault had caused the glow. Everything was normal. The bulbs in the ceiling were off, lamps too. Even the digital clock on my nightstand wasn't flickering. Nothing electrical seemed to explain it. Then I noticed Jasper again. He was no longer at the foot of the bed. He was sitting on my dresser, staring at the wall near the corner. He hissed and arched his back, fur bristling, then darted back toward the bed when I took a step toward him. I followed his gaze and squinted. The corner was empty, but the shadows, they didn't look right. They seemed thicker, like they had a slight shimmer along the edges. When I blinked, it was gone. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination. I'm not prone to hallucinations, and I'd been awake and working late most nights this week. Fatigue can play tricks, but the smell of ozone wasn't in my head, and Jasper never acts like that without reason. I grabbed my flashlight from the desk drawer. The beam cut through the dim blue haze that still clung to the room. I circled the perimeter, shining it into corners, behind furniture, along the walls. Nothing. Everything was normal, except the subtle bluish tint that didn't belong to any source I could identify. I sat back down on the edge of the bed, breathing shallowly. The pulsing blue light replayed in my mind, each soft beat echoing in the silence. After a while, I convinced myself I should just go back to sleep. Maybe it was a strange electrical phenomenon or some reflection from outside. Maybe the world just likes to freak me out at 3 a.m. But I didn't sleep well. Every time I drifted, I felt the air shift slightly, like a current brushing against my skin. I imagined the blue glow returning, filling the room again. I tried to shake it off, but my dreams were restless, filled with faint flickers of light and the metallic tang that lingered in my nose. The next morning, I woke to a normal room. Sunlight poured through the blinds, and everything looked mundane. My desk cluttered, the bed unmade, Jasper asleep in the same spot he usually favored. I checked the outlets, the lamps, the window. Nothing out of place, no trace of the glow, no trace of the smell either. I rubbed my face and went about the day, telling myself I'd imagined it. But small things unsettled me throughout the week. Lights in the fridge flickered slightly, though I hadn't noticed before. My cat refused to enter the bedroom at times, hissing toward the same corner where he had first reacted. And sometimes, late at night, I'd catch a faint bluish tint at the edge of my vision, gone when I turned to look directly. I started keeping a notebook, writing down the time, temperature, wind, and anything I noticed whenever the faint light returned, or when Jasper acted strange. A few nights later, I woke to the faintest pulse of blue again, almost imperceptible this time, with the same ozone smell lingering in the air. I blinked and it faded, but my notebook confirmed the pattern. It wasn't my imagination. After that, I installed a small camera in the corner of the room just to see if anything would show up. For a week, nothing. The feed looked normal. No glow, no shimmer, nothing. I checked during the day, replayed the footage at night, and it was blank. Yet every so often, the blue tint returned, too subtle for the camera to pick up, but enough that I noticed it when I was alone. I tried asking around, cautiously. Friends suggested stress, lack of sleep, or just weird electrical phenomena. None of them had experienced anything like it, and none of the neighborhood cats hissed at invisible corners. I haven't figured it out. Sometimes I wake at 3 a.m., half expecting the room to be filled with that faint blue glow again. And every time it pulses, twice, faint but deliberate, I smell that metallic tang. And Jasper looks at the same corner, ears flattened, tail twitching, like he remembers something I can't see. I've checked the room from ceiling to floor, electrical systems, the air conditioning, even the vents. Nothing. Still, the faint pulses happen every few nights. They're never long, never bright, never violent. Just enough to make you notice, enough to make you doubt. I've learned to keep the notebook by my bed, keep the camera running, and keep Jasper close. I tell myself I'm safe, that it's probably harmless. But some part of me knows that the world isn't always as solid and predictable as it looks in daylight. And whatever fills my room with that blue glow at 3 a.m., whatever leaves that faint ozone smell behind, it's patient, precise, and entirely outside my understanding. I live with it now, quietly. I don't know why it's here, or what it wants, or if it's even aware of me at all. All I know is that on some nights, the air shifts, the blue pulses, and I can feel, just for a moment, that I'm not alone in the room. I was halfway through a night shift at the small regional airport in Denver when the call came over the radio. It was Flight 319, a commercial jet headed toward Chicago, reporting something unusual. At first, the controller's voice sounded casual, almost joking. Flight 319, you're cleared to report any traffic in your vicinity. But the pilot's tone changed after a few seconds. There was tension in his voice that I could hear even over the static. Denver Center, he said. We're seeing an object about 3,000 feet above us, pacing our speed. No transponder, no lights, nothing we can track. I sat up a little straighter in the control room chair, exchanging glances with Mark, my coworker. Mark shrugged, muttering something about weather balloons. I wanted to agree, but the voice on the radio sounded calm but deliberate, not panicked. Flight 319, Roger? Can you give us a description? I heard the pilot's co-pilot mumble, it's just holding formation. Roger, the pilot replied. It's hard to describe, shaped sort of like a faint shimmer, elongated. Doesn't appear metallic in the usual way. It's keeping perfect distance with us. If we accelerate, it matches. Slow down, it matches. I leaned forward, gripping the edge of the desk. 3,000 feet above a cruising airliner, and the thing just followed. Flight 319, do you have radar contact? Mark asked into the mic. Negative. Nothing on primary or secondary. It's as if it's transparent or outside the radar envelope, the pilot answered. That made my stomach tighten. We'd all trained for traffic, for birds, for drones, even for some weird reflection occasionally. But this was something else. Copy that, Mark said. Are you able to maintain visual? Yes, visual. We can see it against the cloud line. It almost blends in, but it's there. The next 30 minutes were the kind of slow, creeping tension you don't forget. The crew reported the object pacing them, staying roughly a quarter mile above, just moving in perfect sync. They tried maneuvers, small climbs, gradual turns, and the object followed precisely as though reading their instruments. Denver Center, Flight 319, the pilot said finally, voice tight. It's gone. Just vanished over the clouds. No descent, no climb, nothing on radar. Mark and I exchanged the same skeptical look I know anyone in that room had been thinking. Gone. Just like that. We had the usual procedure. Log the sighting, file it with the FAA's Traffic Reporting Division. The flight continued normally, but we kept tabs, just in case. 2 days later, I got an update from the airline's maintenance crew. Flight 319 had landed in Chicago, and during their standard post-flight inspection, the techs noticed something odd. Thin streaks along the wings, almost like frost, but warmer to the touch and slightly metallic. Not ice, not residue from fuel additives, nothing any of the maintenance crew had seen before. Did you check it chemically? Mark asked when I read the memo. Yeah, nothing matched. No metals, no compounds in our database. We sent it to the lab. They said, quote, no identifiable substance. I remember staring at the memo for a while, thinking about the pilots. These weren't rookies. Both had decades of experience and thousands of hours in the air. Their reports were precise, measured, not hallucinations, not optical illusions. A week later, the story made it to the small aviation newsletter, phrased carefully. Unknown object reportedly observed pacing commercial aircraft. No photos, no radar evidence, just pilot testimony and a thin residue on the wings. I kept thinking about what the crew described. Perfect pacing, invisible to radar, gone without a trace. If it had been a drone, it would have had to be enormous to pace a jet. A balloon? Impossible. The description didn't fit any known aircraft, weather phenomenon, or military tech we had clearance to know about. For days afterward, I found myself glancing at the radar screens more often, even when there was nothing in the sky. Every bright dot, every cluster of clouds made me wonder if it was still out there. One night, a couple of weeks later, I drove home after a late shift. Clear sky, crisp air. I couldn't help myself. I looked up the cloud line, imagining the shimmer the pilots had described. I wondered if whatever it was could still be pacing other flights tonight, other crews who wouldn't speak up. I tried to convince myself it was an atmospheric oddity, a reflection, something explainable. But the pilots' voices, calm yet tense over the radio, stayed with me, and the wings, the residue that no one could identify. I never saw anything personally, but I can't stop thinking about it. I check flight patterns now, watch radar even when my shift isn't on. I know it sounds paranoid, but some things you notice only after you've been given proof, however fleeting. Sometimes I tell myself that if it was just some rare phenomenon, someone else would have seen it too. But there was never a trace. No radar echo, no sound, no satellite data, nothing. Just an object that could keep pace with a jetliner at 30,000 feet, then vanish. And wings coated in something human science couldn't name. I haven't stopped thinking about it since. And maybe that's the real part that unnerves me. How small and powerless you feel when there's something in the sky that acts on its own terms, unseen, untracked, and utterly indifferent to everything you know about the world. Some nights, when the wind is still and the clouds are low, I swear I can picture it hovering above the cloud line again, waiting just beyond the edge of radar, perfectly still, perfectly invisible. I was hauling a load of steel pipe from Flagstaff to Barstow when it happened. Midnight run, mid-April, sky clear as glass. I've been driving trucks for almost 15 years, mostly southwest routes, and I know that stretch of desert like the back of my hand, long, flat, nothing but scrub and stars for miles. That night, I was about 60 miles east of Kingman, Arizona, heading west on I-40. No traffic in either direction, just me and a sky full of stars so bright it almost looked fake. The radio was fading in and out, and my mind had gone into that quiet zone long-haul drivers know, half alert, half hypnotized by the white lines. I remember glancing at the clock, 12:47 a.m. The desert was cold, maybe in the low 40s. I had the window cracked for some air. That's when I noticed something strange out the windshield. A patch of sky that looked darker than the rest. At first, I thought it was a low cloud or maybe a trick of my eyes. The stars just vanished in one section above the horizon. No movement, no lights, just a triangle-shaped void where the sky should have been. I leaned forward, squinting. It wasn't subtle. The stars around it were crystal clear, but this shape was perfectly black, sharp-edged and huge, easily the size of a football field, maybe more. It was moving, but slow. Slower than any plane, slower than a glider. It didn't drift like a cloud either. It glided, dead silent, steady. I turned down the radio and rolled the window further, waiting to hear something. A hum, maybe a jet whine, anything. Nothing. Just the wind and the tires. I coasted a little under the speed limit to watch it. The road stretched dead straight for miles, and the thing floated diagonally across it, cutting west. It was hard to judge distance, but I'd say it wasn't more than a couple thousand feet up. Low enough that I should have seen at least a faint light or reflection. But it absorbed everything. Even the moonlight seemed to vanish into it. For a few seconds, I convinced myself it might have been some kind of stealth aircraft. We get plenty of military flights out there. Edwards and Nellis are both within range. But the way it moved, the absolute silence, didn't line up with anything I'd ever seen. I slowed to a crawl, half in the lane, half on the shoulder. No other cars. The desert was dead quiet. I watched it slide overhead, directly above my cab. When it did, something strange happened. My headlights dimmed slightly, like when you crank a window and the voltage dips for a second. My dash lights flickered too. Just a blip, maybe half a second, but enough to notice. Then, everything was still again. The truck ran fine, engine steady, but my CB hissed with static, like someone was keying the mic on and off somewhere nearby. I checked the radio channel. It was empty. I stuck my head out the window, scanning the sky. The triangle had moved past me now, maybe a mile out, still gliding low. Then it stopped. Just stopped. No arc, no turn, no slowing. 1 second it was moving, the next it was motionless, suspended above the desert. I put the truck in park, stepped down, and stood on the gravel shoulder. The night was freezing. Every sound carried, the crunch under my boots, the wind whispering through dry brush. But above me, nothing. No hum, no drone, not even a vibration in the air. The stars around the object twinkled, but inside that triangle, total blackness. I must have stood there a full minute, just watching. I didn't feel scared exactly, more like my brain couldn't process what it was seeing. It felt wrong, like seeing a shadow cast by something that wasn't there. Then it blinked out. Not sped off, not faded, just gone. One frame it was there, the next, it wasn't. The stars reappeared instantly where it had been, like someone flipped a switch. I kept staring at the spot, waiting for it to come back, but the sky was clean. The CB crackle faded and my headlights went back to normal brightness. I remember checking my phone, thinking I'd record something if it returned, but my signal bar was empty. Not one bar, even though I'd had service just a few minutes before. I got back in the truck and started rolling again, a little faster this time. After maybe 5 miles, I glanced in the mirrors and saw light. 3 white orbs far back on the horizon in a perfect line. They hovered for a few seconds, completely still, then tilted in unison and dropped below the horizon like they'd been pulled down by a string. I muttered out loud, "No way," and kept driving. My phone buzzed once, signal returned, but the clock on the dash caught my eye. It read 1:31 a.m. That made no sense. The whole thing, from when I first saw the object to when it vanished, had felt like maybe 15 minutes tops. I must have checked my watch a dozen times after that, trying to convince myself I'd just lost track. About 20 miles later, I stopped at a gas station in Yucca, one of those all-night ones with fluorescent lights and a vending machine that never works. The clerk, a kid, maybe 20 years old, looked half asleep behind the counter. I asked if he'd seen anything weird in the sky lately. He shrugged, said, "Sometimes the Air Force runs tests out here." I went to pump gas, but when I stepped out, I noticed the desert smelled faintly metallic. Not like gasoline, sharper, almost like ozone after lightning. The wind was calm, and the air had that charged feeling, like something had just passed through. I looked up again, scanning for movement, but the sky was normal. Stars bright and steady. For a second, I thought I saw a faint line across the sky, a ripple like heat distortion, but it was gone before I could be sure. I finished fueling and checked the truck over, half expecting to find something off. Everything looked fine except for a thin gray film on the hood and mirrors. I wiped it with my finger, smooth, chalky, almost powder-like, but it left a faint metallic sheen under the lights. I assumed it was desert dust, but when I rubbed it between my fingers, it felt greasy. I wiped my hand on my jeans and got back in the cab. The smell followed me, faint but noticeable. The rest of the drive to Barstow was quiet. No more lights, no more interference. The closer I got to town, the more I convinced myself it had to be some kind of test flight. Something experimental, maybe optical camouflage or low-emission propulsion. But the silence, the instant disappearance, the time gap, none of that fit. When I dropped the trailer that morning, I walked around the truck again. That same residue was on the trailer's roof, barely visible unless the sun hit it right. I asked the yard manager if any other drivers had seen strange lights near Kingman that week. He just gave me a look and said, "You been skipping sleep again, Keller?" I didn't push it. A couple days later, I went through a truck wash and the residue came right off, but I noticed something odd. The wiper blades had a faint discoloration along the edges, almost a burn mark. Not charred, not melted, just faintly darkened. The mechanic couldn't explain it. Said maybe something in the wash chemicals reacted with the rubber. I've run that route since then, dozens of times. The desert's always quiet, always empty. But every time I pass that stretch, I can't help glancing up. half expecting the stars to blink out again. They never have. But sometimes, and I can't explain this part, the radio still cuts out for a few seconds, right around mile marker 83. And if I roll the window down, just for a moment, there's that same metallic tang in the air. I had been driving all day through the northern stretches of the Rockies, hauling camping gear to a small site I'd been wanting to check out for weeks. My name's Ryan Keller. I live in Denver, and I've done a lot of solo trips into the mountains, but this one felt different from the start. Maybe it was the heavy gray clouds rolling in, or the thick fog clinging to the pines as I pulled onto the Forest Service road. I didn't think much of it at first. It happens a lot out there. The site I'd picked wasn't a formal campground, just a little clearing next to a creek off a dirt track that had been barely maintained. When I arrived, the GPS still had a weak signal, but it kept jumping around, blinking, searching every few minutes. I shrugged it off. Cell service barely ever works that deep. I spent the first hour setting up the tent, hauling water from the creek, and making a small fire pit. The fog rolled through thick and fast, clinging to the trees and making the world feel smaller, tighter. I remember thinking that if someone or something were out there, it would have the perfect cover. I laughed at myself, shook it off, and climbed into my tent around 8:30 p.m. The wind picked up and rattled the sides of the nylon, the only sound besides the creek trickling nearby. I checked my GPS one last time before bed. Signal was steady, showing the exact clearing I'd parked in. Then I turned off the flashlight, rolled over, and tried to sleep. The fog muffled everything. Around 11:15 p.m. I woke up. Not from a noise, not from the wind, just a feeling that something had shifted. I sat up and grabbed my GPS from the side pocket of the tent. It had lost all signal. The screen blinked blank, no coordinates, nothing. I figured it was just the coverage again, but the timing felt weird. It wasn't uncommon, but something made me tense. I waited, sat in the dark, listening. The creek gurgled, the wind whispered, and then there was a sound that didn't belong. Faint, low, almost like static, but not from any device I had. I leaned out the tent flap and scanned the clearing. Nothing, just fog and trees and the faint outline of my car. The feeling in my chest didn't go away. 10 minutes later, the GPS flickered back on. I checked the screen and froze. I was 11 miles from where I had been, 11 miles. I hadn't moved. My truck was exactly where I'd left it, and the campsite didn't look any different. I double-checked, thinking maybe I'd misread something. No, the coordinates were completely different, way out on a ridge that I hadn't passed or even seen that day. I didn't panic, not right away. I put it down to a glitch, maybe the combination of heavy tree cover, fog, and altitude playing tricks on the GPS. But my gut told me it wasn't a normal error. I started walking around the clearing, scanning the fog. Everything seemed normal, but the air felt heavier than it had when I arrived, dense in a way that made it harder to breathe. Then I heard it. A soft, rhythmic thrum, low and steady like distant machinery humming. Not like a car, not like a generator, too constant, too precise. I froze, straining to hear. The sound didn't move, but the fog seemed to pulse with it, vibrating slightly as if the world itself was resonating. I shined my flashlight down the dirt road I'd driven in on. Nothing. No lights. No movement. Just fog and the black shapes of the pines. Then, for the first time, I noticed the shadows. They didn't behave normally. My flashlight beam would sweep across a tree, and the shadow on the ground would stretch in one direction, then twitch as if it had its own momentum. I blinked, and it corrected itself, behaving like a normal shadow again, but the momentary twitch made my skin crawl. I tried to keep calm, reminding myself I'd been camping alone many times before, but every instinct in me was screaming to leave. I debated getting my truck and driving out, but the fog made the road nearly invisible beyond 10 feet, and I couldn't risk hitting a tree. Plus, the GPS being completely wrong meant I couldn't rely on it to navigate. I crawled back into my tent, keeping my flashlight close. The thrum continued, constant but faint, mixing with the creek and wind. I tried to focus on normal things, the fire pit, my gear, even Jasper's old cat harness I'd brought for company, but nothing felt right. It was like the fog and the sound were separate from reality, layered over the world I thought I knew. Eventually, exhaustion forced me to doze off. I woke again around 2 a.m., fog pressing against the tent walls, and the thrum had intensified slightly. My flashlight slipped from my hand as I heard movement outside. Not fast, not heavy steps, more like a soft brushing along the grass. I didn't dare unzip the tent. I just sat, breathing slowly, trying to track the sound. It stopped after a minute, and the forest fell silent again. Morning came slow and gray. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing my campsite intact, my truck exactly where I'd parked it. I walked down the road, still tense, retracing my steps from the day before. Everything looked normal. No signs of any disturbance. No footprints, no unusual marks. Just the same pine needles and rocks. I checked the GPS again. It still showed the location from the night before, the one 11 miles away. I restarted it, recalibrated, and after a few minutes, it snapped back to the actual coordinates. I sighed, half relieved, half questioning my own sanity. I packed up quickly, still on edge. Every time I glanced at the tree line, I thought I saw shapes shifting in the fog, just at the edge of perception. I told myself it was morning light, shadows, exhaustion, but that low hum followed me all the way to the truck. I climbed in, started the engine, and it stopped abruptly. Silence. The drive back down the mountain was uneventful, but the memory lingered. I kept my eyes on the tree line, on the fog, on any movement, but everything remained normal, or at least normal looking. Yet that strange pulse, that warped GPS reading, the way the shadows had twitching moments of independence, it all stayed with me. I can't explain what happened that night. The GPS glitch could have been electrical interference, a quirk of terrain. The thrum could have been some strange wind pattern. But the fog, the shadows, the pressure in the air, and the precise, unexplainable jump in my location, it all adds up to something I can't rationalize. I still go camping. I try to remind myself it's mountains, fog, and electronics, nothing more. But when I'm alone and the mist settles, I can't shake the feeling that the world has layers I don't see. And that night, on that road, one of those layers brushed up against me. I've tried checking online for reports from that area. Nothing. Just standard warnings about bears, landslides, and the occasional lost hiker. No one else mentioned anything like I saw. It's been months, and sometimes late at night, I think about the GPS coordinates flashing, the hum vibrating through the forest, and I feel that same tightening in my chest. Like the mountains themselves had shifted. Just enough to remind me they're not entirely predictable. I don't know if I'll ever understand it. All I know is that night changed how I feel about being alone in the forest. Even now, I hesitate when the fog rolls in, and I find myself checking the GPS one last time, even though I know the signal will work fine, just in case. It was late August when it happened. I was sitting on the porch after dinner, same way I usually do when it's too hot to be inside. I live just outside of Chillicothe, Ohio, not really the middle of nowhere, but close. The kind of place where your nearest neighbor's a half-mile down the road and you can see every star when the sky's clear. That night was one of those nights. Air still, crickets going nonstop, smell of cut hay drifting in from the fields. I just finished a beer and was scrolling through my phone when I noticed something moving up in the sky. At first I figured it was a plane, a few bright lights in a straight line, steady and slow. But as I watched, I realized they weren't blinking like plane lights do. They were orange, white, almost like candlelight, and they moved together in a way that didn't look normal. There were 6 of them. Perfectly spaced, drifting west to east. No sound, no contrail. Just there. I got up and leaned against the porch railing to get a better look. The lights weren't high like stars, but not low enough to make out any shape either. Maybe a few thousand feet up. They stayed in formation for a while, then one of them, the one on the far left, broke off and started moving downward. Not falling exactly. More like descending with control. It dropped slow, steady, until it was noticeably lower than the rest. I thought maybe it was a drone, but it was way too high and way too bright for that. Plus, I couldn't hear a thing. The rest of the lights kept moving east until they started fading into the haze on the horizon. But that one light, the one that dropped lower, stopped moving completely. Just froze there, hanging above the tree line. I watched it for maybe 30 seconds before realizing it wasn't over the trees. It was over me. I don't know how I noticed. Maybe the way it lined up with the roof line or how the glow shifted as it moved slightly forward. But once I realized it was directly above my house, my stomach went tight. I stepped off the porch into the yard to get a clearer view. The light was maybe 100 feet up, maybe more. Hard to tell in the dark. It wasn't blinding, but it had this white gold glow, like a spotlight seen through fog. No beam, no flicker, just an even, steady light. For a minute, nothing happened. It didn't move. I didn't move. The crickets had gone quiet, which made everything feel wrong. I could still hear the faint hum of the highway in the distance, but the air around me felt thick, heavy, almost. Then I noticed something else, a faint vibration underfoot. Barely noticeable, but there. It wasn't the ground shaking, it was more like the air itself had a pulse. I called out, "Hey!" I don't even know why. Maybe to see if it'd react. It didn't. I went back to the porch and grabbed my phone. Tried to record it, but the screen went all grainy, full of static lines. The light looked normal to my eyes, but on the phone it was jumping, flickering, pulsing in and out of focus. Then my phone froze completely, just locked up. Wouldn't shut off, wouldn't switch apps. That's when I noticed a faint sound. Not loud, more like a low tone, almost below hearing range. It wasn't coming from the house or any direction I could pinpoint. It just hung in the air, a single note that you felt more than heard. The light dimmed a little, like someone turned a dial, then flared brighter again. I remember stepping backward instinctively, watching it from the edge of the porch. My neighbor's dog started barking way off down the road, sharp, panicked barks. Then another joined in. The tone in the air got louder for a second, and both dogs stopped at once. I don't know how long I stood there. It could have been a minute or 10. The light didn't move, didn't change color, just hovered. I started to think maybe I should call someone, but the idea of walking inside and turning my back on it made me feel sick. I decided to yell again. "What are you?" Nothing, just the steady glow above my roof. Then, without warning, it moved. Not fast, it just slid sideways, smooth and silent, maybe 50 feet toward the field behind the house. No arc, no acceleration, like someone dragging an icon across a computer screen. The light faded as it moved until it wasn't visible at all. The crickets started back up almost immediately. My phone unfroze too, the flashlight icon still on the screen where I tried to tap it. I tried recording again, but there was nothing to see, just a normal night sky. I waited a few minutes before going back inside. The air in the house felt stale, like it hadn't circulated in hours. I checked the time, 9:52 p.m. I could have sworn it was closer to 9:30 when I first saw the lights. I went to bed around 11, but I couldn't fall asleep. Every few minutes I'd glance out the window, half expecting that glow to come back. It didn't. When I finally drifted off, I woke up a few hours later to a faint flicker on the wall. It wasn't lightning, the sky was clear. It looked reflected light, just a couple of quick pulses, like a flashlight flashing through frosted glass. I sat up and looked around, but nothing was there. The room was quiet. The next morning, I went outside. Everything looked normal, except for one thing. The grass directly behind the house, maybe a 15-foot patch, was pressed flat in a circular pattern. The blades weren't burned or discolored, just flattened like something heavy had settled there briefly. I touched the soil, dry on the surface but damp underneath, which was odd since it hadn't rained in over a week. There was a faint metallic smell too, like when you handle old batteries. I didn't tell anyone at first. It sounded stupid even thinking about it. But 2 days later, my neighbor Randy stopped by to drop off some eggs from his hens. Out of nowhere, he asked if I'd seen the weird plane show the other night. I asked what he meant. He said his wife saw lights out by the ridge around 9:30, moving in formation. She thought it was some kind of military exercise because they were so precise. I asked if one of them came lower, and he said she didn't notice, just that they moved funny. That's when it clicked that I wasn't imagining it. Someone else saw at least part of what I did. That night I went out again, same time, just to see if anything would happen. The sky was clear, stars bright. Nothing moved, no lights, no sounds. But when I sat down in the same chair and looked up, I got that same tight feeling in my chest, like something was watching back. I stayed out maybe 20 minutes before going in. As I closed the door, a faint hum, not loud, just like a refrigerator kicking on, rolled through the air for a second, and then stopped. Since then, I've noticed a few odd things. My phone compass spins randomly when I'm on the porch. The security light flickers once in a while, always around the same time at night. And a few times when I've looked out the window before bed, I've caught a faint reflection in the glass, a small round glow behind me that isn't there when I turn around. Could be nothing. Probably is. But sometimes when the night's still and the sky's clear, I catch myself staring up, waiting for those lights to come back, and wondering what would have happened if that one hadn't stopped right above me. It was late August when it happened. I was sitting on the porch after dinner, same way I usually do when it's too hot to be inside. I live just outside of Chillicothe, Ohio. Not really the middle of nowhere, but close. The kind of place where your nearest neighbor's a half-mile down the road and you can see every star when the sky's clear. That night was one of those nights. Air still, crickets going nonstop, smell of cut hay drifting in from the fields. I just finished a beer and was scrolling through my phone when I noticed something moving up in the sky. At first, I figured it was a plane. A few bright lights in a straight line, steady and slow. But as I watched, I realized they weren't blinking like plane lights do. They were orange-white, almost like candlelight. And they moved together in a way that didn't look normal. There were 6 of them, perfectly spaced, drifting west to east. No sound. No contrail, just there. I got up and leaned against the porch railing to get a better look. The lights weren't high like stars, but not low enough to make out any shape either. Maybe a few thousand feet up. They stayed in formation for a while, then one of them, the one on the far left, broke off and started moving downward. Not falling, exactly. More like descending with control. It dropped slow, steady, until it was noticeably lower than the rest. I thought maybe it was a drone, but it was way too high and way too bright for that. Plus, I couldn't hear a thing. The rest of the lights kept moving east until they started fading into the haze on the horizon. But that one light, the one that dropped lower, stopped moving completely. Just froze there, hanging above the tree line. I watched it for maybe 30 seconds before realizing it wasn't over the trees. It was over me. I don't know how I noticed. Maybe the way it lined up with the roofline or how the glow shifted as it moved slightly forward. But once I realized it was directly above my house, my stomach went tight. I stepped off the porch into the yard to get a clearer view. The light was maybe 100 feet up, maybe more. Hard to tell in the dark. It wasn't blinding, but it had this white gold glow like a spotlight seen through fog. No beam, no flicker. Just an even, steady light. For a minute, nothing happened. It didn't move. I didn't move. The crickets had gone quiet, which made everything feel wrong. I could still hear the faint hum of the highway in the distance, but the air around me felt thick, heavy, almost. Then I noticed something else, a faint vibration underfoot. Barely noticeable, but there. It wasn't the ground shaking. It was more like the air itself had a pulse. I called out, "Hey!" I don't even know why. Maybe to see if it'd react. It didn't. I went back to the porch and grabbed my phone. Tried to record it, but the screen went all grainy, full of static lines. The light looked normal to my eyes, but on the phone it was jumping, flickering, pulsing in and out of focus. Then my phone froze completely, just locked up. Wouldn't shut off, wouldn't switch apps. That's when I noticed a faint sound. Not loud, more like a low tone, almost below hearing range. It wasn't coming from the house or any direction I could pinpoint. It just hung in the air. A single note that you felt more than heard. The light dimmed a little, like someone turned a dial, then flared brighter again. I remember stepping backward instinctively, watching it from the edge of the porch. My neighbor's dog started barking way off down the road, sharp, panicked barks. Then another joined in. The tone in the air got louder for a second, and both dogs stopped at once. I don't know how long I stood there. It could have been a minute or 10. The light didn't move, didn't change color, just hovered. I started to think maybe I should call someone, but the idea of walking inside and turning my back on it made me feel sick. I decided to yell again. "What are you?" Nothing. Just the steady glow above my roof. Then without warning, it moved. Not fast, it just slid sideways, smooth and silent, maybe 50 feet toward the field behind the house. No arc, no acceleration. Like someone dragging an icon across a computer screen. The light faded as it moved until it wasn't visible at all. The crickets started back up almost immediately. My phone unfroze too, the flashlight icon still on the screen where I'd tried to tap it. I tried recording again, but there was nothing to see, just a normal night sky. I waited a few minutes before going back inside. The air in the house felt stale, like it hadn't circulated in hours. I checked the time, 9:52 p.m. I could have sworn it was closer to 9:30 when I first saw the lights. I went to bed around 11, but I couldn't fall asleep. Every few minutes I'd glance out the window, half expecting that glow to come back. It didn't. When I finally drifted off, I woke up a few hours later to a faint flicker on the wall. It wasn't lightning. The sky was clear. It looked like reflected light, just a couple of quick pulses, like a flashlight flashing through frosted glass. I sat up and looked around, but nothing was there. The room was quiet. The next morning, I went outside. Everything looked normal, except for one thing. The grass directly behind the house, maybe a 15-foot patch, was pressed flat in a circular pattern. The blades weren't burned or discolored, just flattened like something heavy had settled there briefly. I touched the soil, dry on the surface but damp underneath, which was odd since it hadn't rained in over a week. There was a faint metallic smell too, like when you handle old batteries. I didn't tell anyone at first. It sounded stupid even thinking about it. But 2 days later, my neighbor Randy stopped by to drop off some eggs from his hens. Out of nowhere, he asked if I'd seen the weird plane show the other night. I asked what he meant. He said his wife saw lights out by the ridge around 9:30, moving in formation. She thought it was some kind of military exercise because they were so precise. I asked if one of them came lower, and he said she didn't notice, just that they moved funny. That's when it clicked that I wasn't imagining it. Someone else saw at least part of what I did. That night, I went out again, same time, just to see if anything would happen. The sky was clear, stars bright, nothing moved. No lights, no sounds. But when I sat down in the same chair and looked up, I got that same tight feeling in my chest, like something was watching back. I stayed out maybe 20 minutes before going in. As I closed the door, a faint hum, not loud, just like a refrigerator kicking on, rolled through the air for a second and then stopped. Since then, I've noticed a few odd things. My phone compass spins randomly when I'm on the porch. The security light flickers once in a while, always around the same time at night. And a few times when I've looked out the window before bed, I've caught a faint reflection in the glass, a small round glow behind me that isn't there when I turn around. Could be nothing. Probably is. But sometimes, when the night's still and the sky's clear, I catch myself staring up, waiting for those lights to come back, and wondering what would have happened if that one hadn't stopped right above me. It was around 11 on a cold March night when my dog, Scout, started growling at the front window. Not barking, just that deep, low rumble he makes when he's uneasy. He's a golden retriever mix, the friendliest dog you could meet, but he only does that growl when something really bothers him. I was half asleep on the couch with the TV still playing. I remember muting it and listening. The wind was steady outside, you could hear it running through the pines behind the house, but otherwise it was quiet. Scout was sitting stiff, ears up, staring at the window like he was waiting for something to move. I got up and pulled the curtain aside. At first, I didn't see anything, just my reflection and the faint outline of the trees against the dark. The yard light was off. I keep it that way most nights because it attracts moths. The moon wasn't out either, so the only thing visible was the faint snow still crusted on the ground. Then I saw it, this soft glow moving slowly along the tree line. It wasn't bright, not like a flashlight or headlights. It was a pale, milky light, almost like a lantern under fogged glass. It drifted horizontally, smooth and deliberate, pausing every few seconds before sliding further along. It didn't bounce or sway like someone carrying something. It was perfectly steady. Scout's growl deepened when it stopped the first time. I thought maybe someone was out there, a trespasser or maybe a hunter tracking something. But there's no reason anyone would be out there that late. The nearest neighbor is half a mile down the road, and the property backs up into about 50 acres of state forest. I turned off the lamp so I could see better through the glass. The glow had stopped again, hovering near one of the larger trees. I squinted, trying to see if there was someone standing behind it, maybe holding a light. Nothing. Just that faint pulse of white. It moved again, a little faster this time, like it was following the edge of the yard. Then it stopped. I realized it was in line with the back porch now, maybe 50 feet from the house. Scout started whining, pacing in circles. I grabbed my phone to use the flashlight and went to the door. I don't know what I thought I was going to do, maybe scare off whoever it was. When I opened the door, the wind hit me hard. It carried this strange smell. Not bad, just sharp, like metal or static. I aimed my phone light toward the trees. Nothing, just snow, weeds, and branches swaying. But the glow was still there, visible between the trunks. When I shined the light at it directly, it faded. Not all at once, but like it was backing away, dimming as it moved deeper into the woods. I stood there for maybe a minute, just watching. My phone light started flickering. Then it shut off completely, even though it was at 70% battery. I went back inside and locked the door. Scout stayed near me, tail low, ears twitching toward the window. I sat back down, phone charging beside me, pretending to watch TV. Every few minutes I'd glance outside, and every time I did, I thought I saw that faint light again, always near the trees, always stopping and starting, like it was looking for something. Around midnight, the house lights dimmed for a second. Just a quick flicker, but noticeable. When they came back, the TV had lost its input connection. The screen was just black with the blue no signal box bouncing around. That's when I heard the noise. It wasn't loud, more like a distant hum or a low electric buzz. It didn't come from outside, though. It felt like it was coming from everywhere at once, through the walls, the floor. Scout's head snapped toward the hallway, and he started barking. Sharp, panicked barks that echoed through the house. I stood up and listened. The hum pulsed once, then stopped. The air felt charged like the moment before a lightning strike. When everything went quiet again, Scout bolted the kitchen window and started growling all over. I followed and looked out, and the light was back, closer this time. It was sitting maybe 20 feet from the back steps, perfectly still. The glow wasn't round anymore. It looked more like a tall oval, faintly taller than a person. No defined edges, just a shape of light with this soft shimmer around it. I remember whispering, "What the hell?" without meaning to. The moment I said it, the light dimmed slightly, like it reacted to sound. Then it tilted. Not turned, tilted, almost like it leaned sideways. I can't explain it better than that. Scout barked again and lunged toward the door, nails scraping the floor. The light held there for another few seconds. Then it just folded in on itself, shrunk down fast and disappeared. No fade out, no movement, just gone. I stood there staring at the empty yard until I realized my hand was shaking. I turned all the lights on in the house and left them that way until I went to bed. When I woke up the next morning, I checked the spot where it had been. The snow there was half melted in a perfect circle about 6 feet across. The ground underneath was dry, not muddy, just dry and packed down. The rest of the yard was frozen solid. I checked the power lines, thinking maybe something shorted out and caused the flickering. Everything looked normal. I even walked along the edge of the woods, hoping to find a dropped flashlight or some sign that someone had been there. Nothing. Over the next few nights, Scout stayed nervous. He'd sit by the front window from dusk to midnight, ears pricked, staring out like he was waiting for it. He barked a few times around the same hour it had happened, but I never saw the light again. About a week later, I ran into my neighbor, Denise, at the post office. She asked if I'd seen those weird searchlights over the trees the other night. I told her no, and she said they were too low to be from town and too quiet for helicopters. Her husband had thought they were headlights from a truck on the ridge, but the ridge has no roads. She laughed it off, but when she said it, I felt that same tightness in my chest I'd felt standing by the window that night. That evening, I sat on the porch with Scout. It was calm, no wind, just the sound of dripping water from the roof where the snow was melting. Around 10, the power flickered again. Just once, like a quick blink. I turned to look at the tree line, but it was dark. Then Scout's head jerked up. His ears went back, and he stared at the woods for a long time without making a sound. I didn't see anything. No movement, no glow. But after a few minutes, I realized I could smell that faint metallic scent again, sharp and clean, like after a lightning storm. It passed after a few seconds, and the air went still again. Since then, I've noticed small things. The motion light on the shed turning on randomly, my phone compass spinning for no reason when I stand near the back door, Scout waking me up at night with that same low growl. It always happens around the same time, between 10:30 and midnight. Always when the wind dies down and the woods go quiet. I haven't seen the glow again, but some nights when I'm outside with Scout before bed, I catch these faint flashes out of the corner of my eye, soft, colorless, gone before I can turn my head. Maybe it's nothing, probably is. But when I see them, Scout always looks in the same direction, straight toward the tree line. It happened last August, just outside a little town called Morley in Alberta. I was driving back from visiting my brother in Canmore, heading east toward Calgary. It was around 8:30 in the evening, still light out, but the sun was low, and the sky had that washed-out orange look it gets in the mountains before dusk really settles in. The weather was perfect. No wind, no clouds, just quiet. I had my window cracked and could hear the tires humming on the asphalt. It was one of those long stretches of highway where you can see for miles, just open land and rolling hills. I remember I just passed a sign for the Morley exit when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just another commercial flight, a small jet or something. There's a regular route that goes over that area, and I've seen planes there plenty of times before. But this one, it wasn't moving. It was at kind of a weird angle to the horizon, like maybe 1,000 feet up, silver or white against the sky. My first thought was that maybe it was heading directly toward me, and that's why it looked still, like that effect when a plane seems frozen because of the angle. But after about a minute, it still hadn't changed at all. No motion, no blinking lights. Nothing. Just hanging there. I slowed down a little, thinking maybe it was some kind of optical illusion. The road was dead straight, and there were no trees or buildings to block my view. The thing just sat there in the air, perfectly still. Then I realized I couldn't hear it. Normally you can pick up a faint hum or a distant roar from a jet, especially that low, but there was nothing. Not even the kind of low rumble you get when sound bounces off the hills. Just silence. I actually pulled onto the shoulder to get a better look. I didn't want to be one of those people who crashes because they're staring at the sky. So I got out, leaned against my car, and watched. It looked like a normal passenger plane. Wings, tail, maybe a bit smaller than a 737. The sunlight was catching on it, so it was easy to see, but it was completely motionless. I checked my phone, thinking maybe I could get a video, but I didn't have service out there. Still, I opened the camera anyway and tried to record. The footage just looked weird, like the focus kept pulsing even though I wasn't moving. I must have stood there for 3 or 4 minutes. Cars passed occasionally, but no one else stopped. A couple of people slowed down, though. One truck in particular, an old red F-150, slowed almost to a crawl as it went by. The driver leaned forward like he was looking at the same thing I was. That made me feel a little better, like I wasn't crazy. Then, just as I started to think maybe it was a blimp or a drone, it shot straight upward. No noise, no buildup, just gone. It moved faster than anything I've ever seen. 1 second it was there, the next it was a tiny white dot streaking into the clouds. I actually stepped back, like I expected to feel something from it. A gust of air, a boom. But there was nothing. I stood there for a while, waiting to see if it came back out of the clouds, but it didn't. The sky just looked normal again. When I finally got back in the car, I checked the clock. It was 8:42. I hadn't realized how long I'd been stopped. It didn't feel like 15 minutes. Anyway, I kept driving. I couldn't stop thinking about it, but I didn't really know what to do. It's not like you can report something like that. I just kept replaying it in my head, trying to make it make sense. Maybe it was a military test, or maybe my brain just messed up the perspective somehow. But then, about 10 minutes later, I noticed something else. In my rearview mirror, way back on the horizon, I could see a faint white light. Not bright, but steady, following at a distance. I told myself it was just a plane on a similar route, but it seemed too low. Every time the road curved, it stayed in the same spot relative to me. Not moving closer, not farther away. At one point, I even slowed down to around 50, and the light seemed to slow too. That's when I started to feel uneasy. I pulled off again at a little rest area near Cochrane, figuring I'd let it pass me if it was actually another vehicle. The light stopped too. I sat there for maybe 5 minutes, engine off, watching the sky behind me. No sound. The light didn't move. It just hung there. Then another car pulled into the lot, a white SUV, and parked a few spaces over. The driver, a woman maybe in her 40s, got out and started walking her dog. She looked up at the sky and froze. I could see her face change, like she was squinting at something. I rolled my window down and said, "Are you seeing that too?" She looked at me, kind of hesitant, then nodded. "Yeah," she said. "That's weird." We both stood there watching it for a while. I asked her what she thought it was, and she said, "It's been there since before I turned off the highway." We talked maybe 30 seconds more, small talk, nervous kind of stuff. Then her dog started whining. She looked back up, then pointed. The light had gotten brighter, like someone turning up a dimmer switch. Then it just blinked out. No fade, no movement, just gone. The woman didn't say anything else. She just got her dog in the car and left. I sat there another minute, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. The rest of the drive home was normal. The sky got darker, the traffic picked up, and by the time I hit the city limits, it felt like maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. But that night, I looked through my phone again, trying to see if the video caught anything useful. The clip was still there, but it wasn't right. The plane's shape looked off, not like it had when I was standing there. In the video, it almost looked like a long, featureless oval, and there was this strange flicker around it, like static. The sound was just wind, even though I remembered everything being dead quiet. I showed it to my brother the next day. He thought it was a glitch. Said maybe the autofocus had been hunting because the subject was too small or too far away. I wanted to believe that. But a week later, I was driving that same route again, same time of evening, same clear weather, and when I passed that same stretch of road, my radio cut out. The music just dropped into static for a few seconds, then came back. That's never happened before, not on that route. And maybe that's nothing. Maybe it's just coincidence. But every time I drive that stretch now, I can't help glancing at the sky. There's this one spot right before the Morley exit where the highway dips and the mountains open up wide in front of you. The air always feels heavier there, not in a spooky way, just dense, still. I keep thinking about how quiet it was that night. The kind of quiet where your own heartbeat feels too loud. I still don't know what I saw. It looked like a plane, but it didn't act like one. It didn't make any sense. Sometimes when I'm driving late and the sky looks the same, pale orange fading to gray, I catch myself scanning for that shape again, just hanging there, waiting. It happened on a drive I've made 100 times before. Highway 30, cutting through the hills outside Astoria, Oregon. I was heading back from a late delivery run, hauling some flooring materials for the hardware store I work for. It was late October, a Sunday night, and I just wanted to get home and crash before the morning shift. The fog started maybe 20 miles out of town. Not the light, misty kind. This was thick, heavy fog that makes the edges of your headlights look solid. Everything looked pale and soft, and the road felt smaller than it was. There weren't any other cars around, not for miles. It was one of those nights where you drive slower than you realize because it's too quiet to gauge your speed. I had the window cracked open just enough to keep the windshield from fogging, and the air that came in was damp and cold. I could smell the river nearby, that mix of salt and wet earth. About halfway between Napa and Svensson, I came around a long bend that opens into a straight stretch bordered by trees on one side and a wide ditch on the other. My headlights hit something standing dead center in the lane ahead. At first I thought it was a deer, or maybe a person walking with their back turned. I eased off the gas, squinting through the fog, trying to make out what I was seeing. The shape didn't move. It looked like a person, tall, maybe 6 feet, but wrong somehow. Too still. The outline didn't have any color to it. It was just this pale gray shape, like it was part of the fog itself. I tapped the brakes, then honked once, thinking maybe someone's car had broken down. The sound felt swallowed by the air, like the fog just ate it. The figure didn't react. By then, I'd slowed almost to a stop. My high beams were on, cutting right through the middle of it, but the light didn't hit like normal. It was as if the beams bent around the shape instead of landing on it. The edges shimmered faintly, not bright, just a sort of blur, like heat rising off pavement. I rolled to a stop maybe 50 feet away. The truck idled low, the wipers squeaking back and forth, and I just sat there watching. The figure didn't move. I can't explain what made me do it, but I turned off my high beams. The second I did, the fog closed in tight. I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. I switched them back on right away, and the figure was gone. The road was empty. I blinked hard, leaned forward, trying to see through the mist, but there was nothing. No shape, no movement. I thought maybe it had stepped off the road, so I inched the truck forward a few yards, peering through the windshield. Then I noticed a faint light in the fog, off to the right side of the road. Not from my headlights, but higher up. It was soft, almost white blue, like moonlight, but there was no moon visible. It wasn't moving, but it pulsed slightly, like it was breathing. I shut off the radio, rolled the window down, and listened. Nothing. No engine noise, no crickets, no wind. Just the low rumble of the truck's idling engine. The light brightened suddenly, not like it was turned up, more like it spread out, diffused through the fog. My eyes watered from the glare. Then I saw it again. The same figure, right in front of my truck. It wasn't walking toward me, it just appeared, standing there again in the headlights. But this time, it was brighter than before, as if light was leaking out from inside it. I swear I could see through it, faintly, like it wasn't solid, just a shape filled with light. I froze. My first instinct was to throw the truck into reverse, but I couldn't move. It didn't feel threatening exactly, more like I'd stumbled into something I wasn't supposed to see. The figure started to dissolve. Not fade exactly. The light inside it seemed to rise, pulling upward until the shape thinned into a column of white. It lifted, slow and smooth, no sound, no disturbance in the air. I watched it drift straight up into the fog, getting smaller, dimmer, until it was gone completely. The second it vanished, the fog shifted, just rolled backward off the road like a tide pulling away. I could suddenly see all the way down the highway again, as clear as day. My headlights looked normal, cutting a clean path ahead. I sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. I drove the rest of the way home with the windows down, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that glow behind me, but the road stayed dark. When I pulled into my driveway around 1 a.m., I realized how quiet it was. Even at night, you usually hear the river or the distant highway. That night, there was nothing, not even the sound of insects. I sat in the truck for a bit, engine off, just listening. Eventually, the normal sounds came back, a frog somewhere down the ditch, a far-off train. The next morning, I drove back out there in daylight just to make sure I hadn't hallucinated the whole thing. I found the exact spot easily. Same stretch of road, same curve. There was nothing unusual about it. No sign of anything burned or disturbed. The grass on the side of the road was damp but untouched. A week later, I mentioned it to a guy I work with, Mark, who used to be a volunteer firefighter in Clatsop County. He said he's heard other people talk about weird fog up in that area, lights that hover or drift across the road at night. Said they called it river ghost fog, just an old story. I laughed it off, but that drive hasn't felt the same since. I still take that route, but I slow down every time I hit that bend, without even realizing it. The fog never looks normal anymore. It always feels like something could be hiding in it, waiting. Once, about a month after it happened, I drove through that stretch on another foggy night. As I came around the same bend, my headlights flickered, just a quick dimming, like a power surge. For half a second, I thought I saw the outline again, just a faint human shape up ahead. But when the lights steadied, the road was clear. That time, I didn't stop. I don't know what I saw. It didn't look like any kind of machine or aircraft, and it didn't act like one. It didn't feel like a person either. Whatever it was, it seemed almost alive, not in a human way, but like it was aware of me being there. Sometimes I catch myself wondering if anyone else on that road saw it that night. Maybe someone did, but they kept driving like I should have. It's strange, I've seen fog my whole life out here, and I've never thought twice about it. But now, whenever it rolls in thick and the world goes quiet, I catch myself looking up, just to make sure nothing's floating there. It was close to midnight when it started. I was driving back from a client visit in northern Arizona, somewhere between Winslow and Holbrook. The stretch of I-40 out there is long, flat, and mostly empty, and at that hour it feels like you're the only person on Earth. I'd been on the road for hours. Just me, the headlights, and the low hum of the tires on the pavement. The weather had turned strange around 10. Not bad, just odd. The air was perfectly still, thus no wind at all, and the temperature had dropped fast. The sky was clear, but the moon looked too bright, like it was closer than usual. Everything outside the headlights looked washed out and pale. I had the radio on low, some AM station out of Albuquerque that I could barely keep tuned. I don't like total silence when I drive at night. I was halfway through a bottle of gas station coffee when the static started creeping in. I fiddled with the dial, thinking it was just interference from the hills, but the noise didn't sound like static, exactly. It had a rhythm to it, like someone whispering fast just on the edge of hearing. At first, I thought it was bleed-through from another frequency, but as I slowed down a little and turned the volume up, I realized it wasn't speech I could recognize. It was voices, definitely human, but too fast, like a tape being played a few times too quick. I remember catching short bursts of syllables, almost words, but they overlapped, rising and falling together in this strange, urgent way. I couldn't tell if it was one voice or a dozen. I turned the radio off. The sound didn't stop. It took me a few seconds to realize that. I sat there, coasting along the highway at 60, waiting for the silence, but the murmuring kept going, muffled now like it was coming from outside the car. I turned the volume knob back on, off, on again. No difference. The voices were there either way. I actually laughed, thinking maybe I was just hearing the road noise weirdly, or wind through a vent. I cracked the window. The sound got clearer. It wasn't words, not really, but the cadence felt intentional. It reminded me of hearing people talking in another room. Too soft to make out, but you can tell when someone's having a conversation. I rolled the window all the way down and leaned a little toward the side mirror. The air was cold, dry, no wind. Nothing around me but open land. The murmuring seemed to be coming from behind the car, faint but steady. Then the radio turned itself back on. No joke. The dial light came on by itself, and that whispering sound filled the car again, louder now. I actually jumped and swerved a little onto the rumble strip before I grabbed the knob and twisted it off. I pulled over on the shoulder, heart going, and just sat there. Engine running, headlights spilling into the empty road. No other cars in sight. The voices faded again, like they'd moved farther away. I shut off the engine. That's when I realized they were still going. Not through the radio. Outside. Somewhere in the open. It sounded like they were coming from the fields north of the road. Dry grass and brush out there, nothing else for miles. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. That prickling sense that someone's nearby. The kind you get when you know you're being watched. I told myself it had to be wind or air moving through something, but there wasn't any. The grass wasn't even shifting. I sat there for a long minute, trying to decide if I should just keep driving or check the trunk or something stupid like that. I even turned the key halfway to restart the car, and right then, a sharp, high noise cut through everything. It was like feedback, but cleaner. One clear, piercing tone that lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then silence again. I turned the headlights off for a moment. I don't even know why. Maybe to see if something out there was reflecting light. The darkness was total, no stars, just a faint gray haze along the horizon. And then I heard footsteps, soft, crunching ones like someone walking on gravel, not close, maybe 30 feet away, off to the right. I froze. The sound stopped too. I waited. Nothing. I switched the headlights back on. The field lit up in pale yellow, showing only dry weeds and fence posts. The voices started again. Faster now, overlapping more, almost frantic. I couldn't tell where they were coming from anymore. Left, right, both. I threw the car into drive and pulled back onto the road. My hands were shaking so bad I almost missed the lane. For the next few miles I kept the radio off, but the murmuring still came and went. Sometimes it would fade out completely, then return for a few seconds, right at the edge of hearing. At one point, I passed a semi pulled onto the shoulder with its hazard lights flashing. The driver was outside, standing by the guardrail, just staring into the darkness on the north side of the highway. He didn't even glance at me when I went by. I slowed down, thinking maybe he needed help, but when I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw him climb back into his cab, and then the whole truck went dark. That was enough for me. I sped up to 80 and didn't let off until I hit Holbrook. At the motel, I parked under a light and sat there for a while, trying to calm down. I could still feel the hum in my ears, not quite hearing it, but sensing it, like when you leave a loud concert and everything's muffled for a bit. Inside the room, I kept the TV on for background noise. Around 1:30 a.m., while brushing my teeth, I heard it again. Faint, quick speech, behind the sound of running water. It was coming from the vent above the mirror. I turned off the faucet. The voices stopped. I went to bed without turning the lights off. In the morning, I checked my car before heading out. Nothing looked touched, but the radio was on, not playing anything, just soft static. The knob was turned all the way down, like someone had powered it up, but muted it. I didn't remember doing that. On the drive home later that day, the radio worked fine. No weird sounds, no voices. But when I passed that same area again, about halfway between Winslow and Holbrook, my phone lost signal for a solid 10 minutes. Completely dead zone. It's not unusual out there. You lose service in the desert sometimes. But it happened again on my next trip through a few weeks later, in the exact same spot. Same time of night, too. The voices never came back. Not like that, anyway. But every so often, when I'm driving late and scanning for a station, I'll catch a quick burst of sound that feels too fast, too layered, and I'll change the channel before it settles in. It's weird. You can tell when something's not just static. There's a pattern to it. That night still plays in my head sometimes. The way it felt when the car went quiet and the air outside seemed to have its own sound. I keep wondering if anyone else on that stretch of highway heard it too. Maybe the truck driver did. Maybe that's why he pulled over. Or maybe it was just me. I don't know. All I know is that it wasn't the radio. I was out on the lake late one night in mid-July trying to catch some quiet before the week started. I keep a small aluminum boat tied up at a little dock near my place up by Lake Crescent in Washington. That night, the air was still, warm but humid, and the sky was so clear I could see the Milky Way stretching overhead. I didn't plan to be out long, just me, a couple of lures, and the water. I pushed off from the dock around 11, letting the oars slip silently into the water. Usually, on nights like that, the lake feels like it belongs to you. No motorboats, no shouting, just soft ripples and the occasional frog. I rowed past the near shore, maybe 70-80 yards, where the lake gets dark fast and deep. The water was mirror calm. You could see your reflection in it so clearly that for a moment I almost thought I was still on the dock. I leaned back, letting the oars rest on the sides of the boat, and just stared at the stars. Everything was perfect, normal. That's when I noticed it. My reflection rippled. I blinked, thinking maybe I'd disturbed it with the oar or the boat had shifted. But the stars above the reflection didn't move at all. Normally a ripple in the water distorts the stars too. They blur, they bend. Not that night. My own image shivered across the surface, stretching and compressing, but the sky stayed rigid. I leaned over to tap the water with my fingers. Nothing. The ripple seemed to respond, though. My reflection shimmered back at me like it had its own inertia. I leaned further, trying to make sense of it. My reflection moved slower than my hand. There was a weird lag, like it was delayed. And then I heard it. A hum. Faint at first, so low I thought it was the boat creaking, or maybe the frogs from the shore. But it didn't sound natural. It wasn't coming from the wood, or the water, or anything mechanical. It was just there. A low vibration that moved through the water and seemed to press against the bottom of the boat. I put my hand back in the water, and the hum felt like it was running along my skin. I froze. I hadn't heard anything like it before, not even on the lake in winter when it freezes over and groans. My first thought was someone had a motor hidden out there, trolling silently. But there was no wake, no lights, no sound of an engine cutting in and out. Just that vibration, like the lake itself was humming. I sat up slowly, scanning the tree line. The shoreline was dark, no lights, no movement, no other boats. I reached for the flashlight I keep under the seat, the little black mag light, and clicked it on. The beam cut through the water, catching the surface. The reflection rippled again, still independent from the sky, and the hum stopped. Just like that. Silence. I leaned back, trying to convince myself I was imagining it, but it felt wrong. My chest was tight, like the air itself had weight. I rested the flashlight across my knees, watching the water settle. The reflection returned to normal after a few seconds. Everything looked ordinary, except for the way my oars were still dripping water, and the sound of the drips was now impossibly loud in the quiet. I dipped an oar again, gently this time, and the water responded normally. No hum, no weird lag, just ripples and stars reflecting perfectly. I sat there for a long time, trying to shake the feeling of being watched, but I couldn't spot anything unusual on the shore or across the lake. I decided to start heading back. Rowing toward the dock, I kept glancing at the water. For the first few minutes, everything seemed fine, calm, quiet. Then I thought I saw something near the middle of the lake, a faint shimmer under the surface, just for a second, like a shadow shifting in slow motion. I froze mid-stroke. By the time I looked again, there was nothing. The air had changed slightly too. The warm humidity felt heavier, almost static. My skin prickled, but I couldn't tell if it was from fear or just the night. I tried humming to myself a dumb little song to fill the silence, and the lake answered. Not a sound, just a vibration again, this time sharper, passing under the boat. I stopped humming. The boat rocked slightly, as if something pushed it from below. I leaned over the side. Nothing. Dark water, no fish, no debris, no ripples beyond my oars, just that faint residue of the hum, like it had left an echo. I kept rowing, faster now, toward the dock. The shoreline was coming into view, familiar. Trees, rocks, reeds, everything looked the same. But the lake felt different, deeper, like it was hiding something I wasn't supposed to notice. I reached the dock, tied the boat, and stood there for a few minutes, just listening. Silence. No hum, no vibrations, nothing moving. I kept thinking the whole time about the reflection, about how the water could ripple without disturbing the sky above. It didn't make sense. I walked back to the cabin, doors locked, lights on. I made tea, sat in the living room, and stared at the lake through the windows. The surface looked normal again, perfectly still. Stars above, reflection below, just like any other night. But I kept noticing little things. The ripples in my coffee seemed slower than they should have been. My cat wouldn't stop staring at the windowsill. Even the hum, faint, almost imperceptible, returned for a second when the wind shifted. I didn't sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that reflection stretching and lagging behind reality, like the water was trying to show me something else. The next morning, I went back out on the lake. Nothing happened. Ordinary sunrise, ordinary calm water, everything normal. I rowed, cast a line, listened to the birds, but I kept thinking about that night, about the hum, about the way the reflection moved differently from the sky. Even now, weeks later, when I row out after dark, I check the stars against my reflection before I dip an oar. Every time I half expect to see that subtle lag, that shimmer, that vibration, but it hasn't come back. Still, I know it's there. Somewhere, in the deep water or in the way the night bends around the lake, waiting. And every so often when the lake is perfectly still, I swear I can feel it under my feet, just a faint vibration, like the world itself humming softly beneath the water. I pulled off the highway because the sky looked wrong. I'd been driving the long way home, up the old county road that climbs out of the valley and hugs the ridge for a few miles. It was late October, cold enough that the windows fogged for a minute when I shut the heater off. I wasn't headed anywhere in particular, just wanted to be somewhere with a view and no one to talk to. The kind of place that makes your problems look smaller from a distance. There was a turnout with room for 2 cars, one of those scuffed pullouts with a cracked sign warning of deer. I killed the engine, sat for a second in the dark while my eyes adjusted, and then stepped out. The air up there had that thin, clean quality mountain air gets, sharper than the valley, with a faint smell of damp pine. The stars were bright and low. A thin band of cloud hung over the eastern horizon, where the valley dropped away. That's when I saw the lights. They weren't aircraft lights. I thought at first maybe a radio tower or some new wind farm with warning beacons, but they were too small and too soft. 3 lights hovered over the valley in kind of a loose triangle, maybe half a mile apart. They sat at roughly the same altitude, low enough that I could make out a slight shimmer in the air beneath them where they touched the horizon. One was a dull white, the others were a pale amber and a cool blue. They pulsed slowly, not flashing so much as breathing. I fumbled for my phone to take a picture. The reflex to document felt stupid and necessary, but the screen stayed dark when I tapped it. The battery icon showed a sliver of life and then blinked away. I shook it and tapped again, still dead. I checked the car charger, nothing. My watch, the digital one I wore, read the right time, but the seconds hand stuttered oddly. Small things you notice when you're standing in the cold, like trying to make sense of something that looks almost deliberate. I walked to the guardrail and leaned over, looking down into the valley. The lights didn't move like planes. They drifted, but with purpose. Slight shifts in formation, drifting apart a few yards and closing again. When one would pulse, the others would dim a beat later, like a delayed echo. No sound carried up to the ridge. The valley was unnaturally silent. I mean that in the simplest way. No cars, no distant dogs, no radios. Even the wind seemed to have been pulled under a lid. At first I told myself it might be a private party down on someone's property, those new LED yard decorations people get. But there were no other sounds. No flash of white columns from houses, nothing that made a human explanation fit cleanly. The lights were set over a place where there's only old apple orchards and last year's cornfield. Nothing worth a light show. I noticed a faint thrum in the air then, a vibration under my feet. It was low, not the kind of noise you'd hear as much as feel, like the distant rumble of a train through your ribs. It didn't come from a single direction. It seemed to be in the whole bowl of the valley, steady and measured. My phone, the one that had blinked dead, lit up for a second with an incoming call screen, then went black again. No name, no number. I stayed up there longer than I probably should have. The triangle of lights held position, drifting slow, as if they were pulling on some invisible strings. Every so often, one of them would flare, briefly brighter than before, and when that happened, the air around it took on a thin film, like heat shimmer, but colder. My ears popped once, a hollow little crack, but there was no change in pressure I could feel. Small, weird little things kept happening. My breath seemed to hang in the air longer, like the fogging of my jacket collar was delayed, and my flashlight, when I aimed it toward the lights, showed nothing. The beam cut through the dark but stopped short where the shimmer began. People in town like to say the mountain plays games with your head at night. I'd always laughed at that. On the ridge, alone, with your old car idling and your coffee long gone cold, there's a certain thinness to reason. Fine. Call it wind, or light refracting off a cold pocket, or rural radio towers. I tried the practical angles, then crossed them off one by one. The lights had a pattern that wasn't accidental, and whatever they were about, whoever or whatever placed them there was spending attention on that valley for a while. Eventually, the cold crept into my bones, and I went back to the car. I wanted the heater and the normal hum of the engine, and the slight normal annoyance of living things. When I opened the door, the interior light came on like it always did, and the dash clock blinked 12 for a second before returning to the right time. I put the key into the ignition and turned. Nothing. Just a single pathetic click. I waited, turned again, listened for the starter's grating whine. The battery light on the dash came on and then off in a slow blink. I thought maybe the cold had taken my battery in the night. I cycled the key, silence except for that click. The radio dial, which had been fine, now stilled on a station that's usually alive with static, only static, and then a thin, high-pitched whine under it that matched the valley hum. I killed the ignition, stepped out again, and listened. The lights had done the same small drift while I was in the car. They hovered, gentle and patient. The valley was the same flat, muted bowl, except for the lights and that throb under everything. My hood pinged slightly as it cooled. I rubbed my hands together and tried the engine again. The click again. After the third time, my frustration edged into a different kind of fear. If the car wouldn't turn over, I could be out there with no signal, stranded on the shoulder. There was a one-bar icon on my phone when I opened it, then it sputtered and vanished. I pushed the hood release, pulled the latch, and popped the hood with cold fingers. The battery terminals looked fine, clamps tight, no corrosion. I jiggled the positive cable as a reflex. Nothing. There was a small humming beneath the engine bay that felt different than the valley thrum. It was sharper, as if something wanted to be heard but with a filter on it. The clock on the dash now read 12 solid, no seconds, like it had been reset to waiting. I should have called someone. I should have walked back down the road to the last house with a light. Instead, I sat on the bumper and watched the lights. I kept telling myself it was just a coincidence. Battery dying, cold, old car. But when another car went by on the highway a mile below, its headlights didn't come into view the way they normally did. The road stayed black. The lights above the valley turned a shade brighter, and then dimmed one by one, as if whoever was tending them were watching me watch them. I tried to start the car again, and the same click answered me. Then when I looked up, one of the lights flared, the blue one this time, and the air shivered around it. The valley hummed louder for a beat. The car didn't start. My hands were on the key, breath fogging in quick little puffs. It took me a moment to notice that my voice sounded hollow when I said out loud, "This is ridiculous." The sound didn't travel far. Even my swear felt swallowed. That hush, absence of usual sound, made me want to move. I hopped into the driver's seat and snapped the dome light off, feeling foolish and exposed with every light on. I tried the starter one last time. The click. Then, as if someone finally let go of a string, the three lights in the valley dimmed to nearly nothing. They didn't move away. They just thinned, as if curtains were being pulled. The hum eased and then stopped. The valley's blackness returned like a blanket dropped into place. The radio snapped from static to a faint AM station, carrying a late-night talk show in the exact place a heartbeat before there had been only a hiss. The phone, which had been a dead sliver, lit up again. I turned the key. The engine caught with a healthy, angry roar, and warm air hit my face. The dash clock hands resumed their normal march. For a moment, I sat there, fingers on the wheel, staring at the dark valley and trying to line up two different memories. Lights above like a slow constellation, and the ordinary blue of passing cars, and the humble, noisy certainty of my old engine. I drove slowly down the mountain. The road was wet up top, but clear on the switchbacks. My stomach didn't settle until I was past the last curve and could see the sodium glow of town spread out below. I pulled into my driveway later than I meant to and left the car running for a long time while I thought. Inside the house, the familiar noises returned. The hum of a refrigerator, a neighbor's muffled late-night TV, the kettle on the counter clicking off when it boiled. I made coffee and drank it standing in the kitchen, hands wrapped around the mug. In the morning, I went back up to the turnout. There were no skid marks, no scorch on the road, nothing unusual in the gravel. The valley looked like any valley you pass on your way home. Up close, there was no sign the lights had been anything but the mischief of a tired brain. The only physical remnant was a small circle of ground on a shoulder where the frost had melted in a neat ring under where my car had sat, as if the cold had been rearranged for a few hours. I didn't tell anyone at work that day. How could I? Say what? That lights hung in a valley and my car wouldn't start until they left? It would sound like boredom talking itself into a story. I told myself the sensible things. Battery on its way out, optics playing games in the dark, the mind trying to knit patterns out of unrelated threads. But that night, when I passed the ridge on the highway, I slowed down the same way I did before. Part of me wants to watch the valley for what's left of the night, and part of me wants to put as many miles between me and that bowl of dark as possible. I cannot explain why the engine refused to turn over while the lights were there, or why the valley held no ordinary sound. All I have is the memory, the three lights hovering, patient and slow, and the way the world around them seemed to pause until they were ready to move on. I launched the drone off the cliff like I always did, gentle throttle until it cleared the scrub and folded into the wind. It was one of those late September evenings where the sun went quick and hard. The sort of dusk that turns everything slick with color for maybe 10 minutes and then it's gone. I wanted the light on the clouds over the bay, that thin band where the marine layer sits low and the boats look like toys. I've flown 100 times from that bluff. The takeoff spot is a small scrub patch with a view of the coastline and the radio tower 2 miles inland if you squint. My name's Eli. I do landscaping by day and fly drones by habit whenever I need a small private thing to focus on. The Phantom hummed steady. I had my controller, goggles, and my phone tethered for telemetry. The wind was light off the water, the gusts predictable. I took her up to about 400 feet, the legal limit for what I like to do recreationally, and I banked out over the ocean. From that altitude, the clouds looked like a sleeping city, a soft white roof, and the sun, still stubborn, was a flat line of orange behind them. I was tracing a slow half circle with the camera, keeping the horizon level, thinking about nothing special. Then I saw something. At first, it was just a bright pixel against the cloud deck, like a speck of lens flare from the sun, but it didn't behave like a flare. It was a single point of white catching the light, steady and small, high above the clouds, too high to be a plane and too bright to be a star at that hour. I nudged the camera up to get a wider angle. The object stayed where it was, reflecting the sun like a tiny mirror. That was odd enough to make me slow everything down. I called it in aloud to no one. There's something up there, because talking keeps you grounded. I zoomed in. It looked like a little coin, flat and bright, nothing mechanical like wings or blinking strobes. It didn't flash, it didn't leave a trail. It just hung reflective, catching the sun with a calm I couldn't place. I checked telemetry. Altitude read 410 feet, GPS solid, battery at 82%. Signal strength read strong, but the RC link indicator blipped pale yellow once and then returned green. I made a mental note and kept watching. Small things matter when you fly. Glitches always start small. A flock of terns crossed the field of view below me, black little commas against the cloud layer. As they passed, the object's reflection didn't change. It stayed still, like nothing had passed under it. The terns made their usual noise, sharp little calls that came through my goggles as thin, high sounds. But when they were gone, there was a different kind of quiet. Not silence. There was always wind and the motor hum, but the ordinary rustle of life felt muted, attenuated, in a way I couldn't explain. I told myself I was being dramatic. I panned the camera to track the horizon and then back up to the object. That's when the first real weirdness happened. I moved the gimbal smoothly up, and for a second, the object was gone from the feed. The sky where it had been was empty. My fingers tightened on the controls. I panned a degree left, and there it was again, no more than a speck. But now, it was lower in the frame, as if it had shifted closer to the drone. I frowned. I eased the craft forward 20 feet just to get a better sense of relative position. Seconds later, with a soft nudge on the right stick to sweep the camera up, the object appeared behind the drone. Not in front of me, not off in the distance, behind the drone. That sentence is how it felt, because what happened on the feed matched what my eyes saw in the goggles. One frame I was looking at clouds and a bright spot high above. The next frame, the bright spot was in the lower left of the screen, right where the drone's rear left prop arc should be. The object sat just beyond the tail, reflecting light at an angle that made no sense. I reflexively swung the bird around to look back, switched to yaw input, and banked a smooth turn. But on the goggles there was that same tiny mirror glint, almost cheeky, perched behind my craft. My heart kicked up. The Phantom is a predictable machine. It doesn't surprise you like that. I thumbed the sticks to yaw 180 degrees. The hillside came into view, then the distant radio tower, and the object wasn't there. My hands hovered. Behind me, in actual sky, there was only cloud and the last wash of sun. I hit pause on the recording function, which is as much reflex as habit. The SD card light flicked solid, then the recording resumed, but the object stayed gone. I backed the craft off a few feet and checked the live telemetry. Nothing abnormal. GPS, attitude, yaw, nothing to indicate a phantom echo. The RC signal held steady on the phone gauge. The goggles registered all the usual overlays: altitude, speed, distance. The object had been out near the cloud deck. Now it had been behind the drone. There was no blur, no trail. it just occupied a different position. I should have Arth return to home id then. 1,000 pilots rules live in your brain, and one of them is when weird things happen, bring it home. Instead, I hovered, taken by a stupid combination of curiosity and the feeling that something outside you should be witnessed. I nudged up and rotated slowly, watching the horizon. For maybe 30 seconds, nothing changed. The object did not reappear. That's when the controller beeped, not the standard low battery chirp I'd watched that bar. This was a short, sharp tone like a message pop. The phone screen flashed a text from my provider. Signal lost in your last known area. Signal lost, but my link showed full bars. I looked down for a heartbeat, and when I looked up again, the object was there, behind the drone, bright and still, right where it had been before. I swear to the oddness of that moment. The text, the quickness of me looking away, the object cropping the edge of the frame. I swung the drone around once more. Gone. I circled slowly 3 times, recorder running, hands steady only because the motor gives you a physical anchor. Each time the camera would show nothing, and then, if I lifted the gimbal with a particular subtle motion, the object would resolve behind the craft for a breath. It was almost like the feed had a blind spot that the object could step into or out of. I thought about interference, RF bouncing off the cliffs, my drone's telemetry overlay glitching. I thought about a mirage, refraction off the marine layer. I thought about 1,000 practical things, because it's easier to clasp concrete explanations in your hands than to let your brain float in the uncanny. I even tried toggling the controller's frequency mode, switching channels, which made the Phantom twitch politely, and the object stayed put behind me for a second, then was gone. No one below on the beach was waving, no lights on the radio tower were flashing, no other craft in view. When I finally decided enough was enough, I brought the drone home with deliberate, slow inputs. I watched the feed all the way to landing. The craft cut down through a thin veil of spray where the fog bank pressed against the cliff, and for the last 10 feet of descent, the object did not appear. I set the bird on the scrub, motors winding down, and my knees felt heavier than they should after a simple hover. I reviewed the footage in the field before packing up because anyone who flies knows how quickly memories rearrange themselves. The file was there on the SD card, last clip timestamped precisely. I scrubbed to the minutes where the object appeared above the clouds. The initial frames showed the bright speck, solid and steady. I advanced frame by frame to the part where I'd panned up and it vanished. The scrub bar jumped exactly where I remembered. Then, where I'd seen it appear behind the drone, the video played a clean sky. There was no object behind the aircraft. For the briefest fraction of a second, the image stuttered, just one frame of undecipherable noise. Then the clip resumed with the drone's tail and scrubland and the rest of the flight, no mirror glint behind my craft. I replayed it, rewound, zoomed the image. Nothing. The audio feed, thin wind and prop hum was intact. No extra chirps captured on the microphone except the one soft beep my controller had made when the text arrived. Back home that night, I put the SD card in my laptop and ran it through the editor. Again, the same sequence. There, gone. Then a clean sky where my eyes remembered light sitting inches behind the drone. I pulled the log files from the controller. GPS consistent, no sudden yaw jumps, battery behavior normal. The phone's service log showed a 3-second no service at the exact time the object appeared behind the drone in my goggles. The paradox was small and big at once. The recorded pixels didn't match the lived view through the goggles. I kept the footage and I kept the logs. I told a friend, Mike, about it over the phone, and he laughed and called me a drama pilot. I didn't argue. What could you say without sounding ridiculous? That your own eyes and the machine's recorded eyes don't agree? That a bright coin of light played hide and seek with your drone in a way that made you hold your breath? In the days after I found myself driving past that cliff slower than before, sometimes I would stop and look up at the clouds and imagine a tiny mirror far above them, catching the last of the sun and then deciding, quietly, without sound, to move. I didn't fly again from that spot for a week. When I did, I went during the afternoon and stayed low, keeping the bird between me and the ocean, like distance would make things less weird. People ask what I think it was. I don't have an answer. The recorded evidence is clean and rational. My memory insists on an afterimage that doesn't exist on any frame. For all I have, it's a small, odd thing, a bright reflection, a second where the air rearranged how it showed itself to me, a moment where technology and perception didn't line up. I filed the clips, logged the telemetry, and kept flying elsewhere. But sometimes, when the sun hangs low and a cloud bank sits like a blank ceiling, I still look up, half expecting a coin of light to catch and wink. I woke up to the ceiling vibrating. At first, I thought it was my imagination. Half asleep, room hazy in the early morning light, but the low hum confirmed it. It wasn't loud, just enough to rattle the plaster lightly, like the whole room was vibrating softly. My bed seemed to move with it. I could feel it in my chest, faintly, like a pulse I couldn't ignore. My name's Graham. I live alone in a small apartment on the third floor of an older building in Ashford. Nothing fancy. Creaky floors, thin walls, the kind of place where you hear neighbors breathing through the walls at night. But this wasn't normal. I lay there for a second, frozen, trying to convince myself it was just the building settling. But the hum was steady, low, and the vibration didn't feel random. It was uniform, almost deliberate. I tried to tell myself it was the radiator or a truck outside, but the street was quiet. My apartment was dead silent except for the hum. I reached over and grabbed my phone. Just wanted to check the time, needed some mundane anchor. When I touched the screen, it lit up, and at the exact moment my finger hit it, the vibration and hum stopped. Completely. Nothing, like a switch had been flipped. I stared at the ceiling for a few seconds, heart racing. 15 minutes ago, I'd gone to bed around 11:30, so it wasn't that late, but it was still early. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that maybe I'd been dreaming and my body felt the vibration. But it had been too real, too coordinated. I got out of bed and moved to the window. Fog was creeping along the street outside, everything damp and gray, early morning mist over the low streetlights. I couldn't see anything unusual, but I noticed the fog itself looked heavier, almost thicker than normal. Not like the weather report I'd seen. Just dense, as if it carried weight. Back in the kitchen, I made coffee, shaking slightly. I kept thinking about the ceiling. It didn't feel mechanical, not like a truck or an elevator passing. It was softer, somehow alive in a way that wasn't alive at all. I tried moving furniture in my mind. Maybe it was the fridge starting, but nothing explained the hum. After a while, I sat down with my cup, staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore it. That's when I noticed the faint light patterns. Not shadows from the fog outside, nothing like that. Just tiny pulses of dim white across the ceiling, like reflections, but with no source I could see. They weren't steady, flickering in odd, uneven patterns, moving across the plaster slowly. I called my friend Eric, just to say something. He's a mechanic and likes weird stuff, so he's good for rationalizing odd things. I told him about the vibration and the hum. He said it sounded like a transformer or some electrical fault. I checked the breakers. Nothing tripped. Everything normal. Later, around 7, I tried going back to sleep in the living room. Couch pulled close to the window. The hum returned, softer, almost like it was testing me, vibrating under my back instead of above. The floor vibrated a little. I stayed still. I didn't move until my phone was within reach. I picked it up. The moment I touched it, everything stopped. Same as before. I started paying attention to little details. My laptop charged differently. Lights in the kitchen flickered slightly when the hum started. Nothing consistent enough to explain what it was. Even the smoke detector beeped once, randomly, like it was reacting to something in the room. At some point, I noticed the hum seemed to come from every direction at once. Not the floor, not the ceiling. It felt like it surrounded me. I sat perfectly still, trying to figure out if it was sound or vibration or both. My cat, Jasper, who usually slept at my feet, wouldn't come near. He stayed crouched near the window, ears flat, eyes wide, staring into the mist outside. I checked my phone again. 7:13 a.m. It hadn't jumped, no lost time this round. But the sensation left me uneasy, like I'd been somewhere else while the hum happened. Like a faint awareness of a presence, unspoken, watching. I didn't go back to bed. Instead, I showered and left the apartment early. Even outside, the fog seemed too thick, too still. No cars, no birds, not even the wind I usually hear in the morning. I drove to the diner, bought coffee, and tried to shake it off. The hum hadn't followed, at least not audibly, but the memory of the vibration lingered in my chest. I called Eric again while driving. He laughed nervously, told me maybe I needed sleep, or maybe a stray signal was affecting the building. I told him it wasn't just a sound, it was weight and presence. He didn't argue, just said to keep notes. Maybe I'd notice a pattern. The rest of the day was normal. Work was normal. People talked about sports and weather. But when I got home at night, I checked the ceiling first. Nothing. I slept with my phone in hand, ready to touch it if it happened again. It did. Around 2:30 a.m., the vibration started again, faint but unmistakable. Low hum, ceiling moving slightly. I stayed perfectly still, heart thumping. I reached for my phone. The moment I touched the screen, it stopped. I tried to explain it to myself rationally, building settling, electrical interference, dreams, stress, but I can't. It's the way it stops instantly when I touch my phone. Like it reacts to me, like it's waiting. I've checked the building, neighbors, wires, even the fog outside. Nothing explains it. I've kept a log, noting times, duration, even the shape of the fog and light patterns. There are irregularities, yes, but no consistent mechanical cause. No pattern I can recognize other than the phone. Now, every night I leave it on the nightstand, thumb hovering near the screen. I don't know why it reacts to that, but I've learned the hard way that if I touch it too late, the hum returns stronger, longer. I've started sleeping in the living room, facing the window, trying to keep sight lines open. I haven't called anyone else. Part of me doesn't want to. People laugh at these things. And part of me worries that the moment I stop documenting, the hum will find a way to move beyond the ceiling. It's subtle, mostly. Not threatening, but persistent, and it waits. It always waits. Every time I wake to it, I wonder if I've lost some small fragment of time again, or if I've only imagined that. But I know the vibration, the hum, the way the air itself feels alive with something I can't name, it's real. And for now, that's enough to keep me from sleeping deeply. The first light I noticed go out was the one on the far side of the barn, the one that faces the field. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee and the security monitor split 3 ways on the laptop. Feed from the driveway, feed from the barn, feed from the back paddock. Because nights this time of year, I like to keep an eye on things. It was late October, damp and dark, and the house felt the same as it always did. Wood stove ticking, the dog's Snickers at my feet, the old radio playing a talk show low in the background. The barn light blinked off at 11:17. Not a slow dim or a stutter, just off. I watched the pixel on the monitor go from bright to black like someone switching it off. I assumed a bulb had died or the motion sensor had timed out. I kept sipping my coffee. 10 minutes later, the light above the tack room, the one closest to the driveway, went out. Then 5 minutes later, the flood on the roofline nearest the house went off. When the house light, the one on the porch, went dark, my coffee went cold in my hand. I get by on routine. I'm Ben Carter, 46, own this plot with the barn and the handful of maple trees. Been here since my dad handed me the deed in '09. I know my wiring, and I know what a dead bulb looks like. So I did the reasonable thing. I grabbed my jacket, Snickers' leash, and went to walk the property. Outside, it was quieter than it should have been. There are usually frogs down by the wet little drainage pond, some trucks on the blacktop every hour, a neighbor's rooster at first light, little life sounds that remind you there's a world out beyond your yard. That night, the air was thick with damp, and there was no noise but the scrape of gravel under my boots. Snickers paused at the run-in to the pasture and gave that soft, puzzled whine she gives when a stranger drives by. She didn't pull me toward the barn the way she usually does when raccoons are at the feeder. She just stood there looking at the barn as if waiting for something to happen. I walked in the light of the remaining porch lamp and checked the bulbs. Everything I could reach looked fine. The filaments whole, sockets snug. The barn's breakers tripped? No. The main panel was green and quiet. I tested the porch flood. It came back on when I flipped the switch, which told me I wasn't going to solve anything by swapping out bulbs mid-November in a cold drizzle. I went back to the house and sat with Snickers on my lap, telling myself not to treat a light outage the way people treat a creak in their attic at 2 a.m. Still, I pulled the footage up on the laptop again. I replayed the barn clip back at half speed. The light flashed a brief gray jitter just before the frame went black. The feed resumed 1 second later and the light was off. I scrubbed forward. On the next camera, the tack room light did the same thing. A momentary wash of overexposure, like someone aimed the camera at something very bright, and then the camera blinked to black for a split second. When it came back, the bulb was off. Every time I moved to the next clip, the pattern was the same. Flicker, 1 frame black, bulb out. That's when I noticed the pattern. The lights went dark in a sequence that matched the way you'd walk from the far field toward the house. Field light first, roofline flood, tack room, then porch. It was like something was moving closer to the house, turning lights off as it went. Calling in a repairman for an emergency at 1 in the morning felt like phoning a plumber because a leaf had fallen in the gutter. But I called my neighbor, Dave, who lives 3 properties over and who has a habit of answering his phone at odd hours. He swore he'd come over. I stayed on the line until I could see his headlights through the trees. He parked, came to the door soaked, and we watched the monitors together. We watched the roof light go off a minute after his truck drove in. Then, on the feed, the porch light stuttered and died. "That's weird," Dave said, which meant he didn't have an explanation. We both went outside and walked the yard, flashlights bobbing. Each light was off where it had been on the screen, but none of the bulbs were cracked or burned. Wiring looked okay. No one had driven a golf cart and knocked things loose. I set my phone to record the feeds while we stood in the yard. The cameras were mounted high on the barn eaves and on the porch fascia. Cheap, but reliable. I wanted something on record if we needed to tell the sheriff or the electrician or anybody. Around 1:20, the sensor on the old hayloft caught something, and the barn camera flicked for a frame before the image blanked. Then the monitor showed a brief blackness, and the light over the field did not come back. The weird part wasn't just that lights were going out. It was the moment before each blackout on the footage. Up close, that 1 frame of overexposure looked different from a flare. It saturated the whole scene, and then, like a curtain pulling, the camera cut to black. The same thing happened on each camera as the sequence progressed. An overexposed wash, a freeze frame of nothing, and then darkness where before there had been light. We started trying obvious things. I took the battery pack off one of the cameras, then swapped power from an extension cord from the house. The cameras responded. If it were a power glitch, it would likely be local to a circuit. But the porch flood and the yard light were on different panels. Everything pointed to a moving pattern rather than a wiring failure. The lights were turning off one by one as if someone walked the property and touched them out of existence. Dave kept saying, "Maybe deer messed with the sensors," or "maybe a drone's shorting the lines," which are reasonable guesses if you're the sort of person who organizes explanations. I didn't dismiss them. I just couldn't reconcile a drone in the low fog that would black out a camera feed and not register on the thermal we used on the farm, or deer that could produce a 1-frame overexposure that looked like sunlight on a chrome surface. The facts didn't fit the toys. Around 2 a.m., Snickers started pacing, that low, annoyed motion she makes when raccoons are annoying the coop. Then she froze and barked. 1 quick, sharp bark and no more. Her hackles rose. She pressed against my thigh like something had memory in its teeth. The old barn owl that nests in the cupola didn't even cough. All the animals were unusually still. The livestock in the little pasture made no fuss. The night condensed into the hum of the fridge and the rain and a sensation in the air like before a thunderhead. Pressure, exactly. I checked my pocket watch. It had stopped on the minute I first went out to check the bulbs. My phone said the right time. Digital clock and old watch couldn't agree. The radio in the kitchen that had been playing static and reruns hiccuped, and for 1 second I swear I heard something that wasn't English. Syllables rolling under the static like someone trying to speak through a sock. I rewound the DVR. The audio track had nothing there. Dave suggested we go sit in the truck and wait until dawn. I nearly agreed. Then the porch light clicked back on. The camera feed resumed with a clean picture and the porch lamp burning steady, but the roofline flood remained dark, and so did the far field light. We had two images, what the monitors showed live and the record that showed a blackout sequence. The gap felt like a physical thing between them. I kept reviewing the frames, the overexposure, the one frame cut to black, the light out. By around 3:15, every light out in the sequence had gone dark, the last one being the lamp near the back door. The cameras showed the same, the wrap of bright, a blank, then the world changed. We locked up the house and sat in the living room with all the lights on until the radio smoothed back to old songs. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that one frame on the footage, how it looked like someone had swept a polished steel blade across the field of view, and for that blink, the camera couldn't see anything but a glare. I thought of lenses and sun and the moon and how none of those fit a cold, rainy night. Dawn came without fireworks. The fog lifted, and with it, apparently, whatever had been doing the turning off. All bulbs worked when the electrician, a young woman named Kara, came with a tester and a ladder. She called me out on the porch at 8, frowning. Ben, everything's fine. Circuits, bulbs, sensors, there's no electrical issue. I gave her the footage. She watched it in a clot of ceramic and tired elbows and didn't say much until the end. Ben, the camera's clipped out right at the moment of something, she said finally. See this? That frame here? Looks like the sensor overloaded, like a bright light just in front of the lens. But it's raining, it's cloudy, I said. What bright light? She shrugged. Could be reflection off something metallic. Could be... And she stopped because there are only so many sentences electricians use when the diagrams don't help. We stood in the yard and checked every light, every sensor, every line. Nothing was loose. The animals were back to their usual business. Snickers rehearsed her circle around the porch. The world felt normal in the daylight the way it always does. More forgiving and a little stupid for having frightened you the night before. I ended up pulling the motion sensors off manual and set all the barn and yard lights to stay on through the night. Kara suggested it as a practical fix. If something is tripping sensors in sequence, keep them on so they can't be switched out. It's the kind of solution that feels like duct tape, but works. I figured I'd sleep with both eyes open for a week, check the footage every morning, and call it a teachable glitch if it didn't happen again. For 3 nights, nothing happened. The lights stayed on, the cameras stuttered and recorded the usual: owls, headlights on the county road, cows bored by sunrise. Then on the 4th morning, while I was making coffee, I skimmed through the recording from 2:07 a.m., and there it was. One frame in the barn camera where the picture blazed white, and in the next frame, everything was simply darker, but the lights were on. The manual override had worked, but the sensors still recorded an anomaly. On that one frame, in the upper left of the feed, there was a faint reflection, like a crease on satin. It didn't resolve into anything I could name. I showed it to Kara. She looked, she frowned, and she said, "You ever think about selling? Like some people say, you need a vacation instead of, I have no idea." I didn't sell. I left the lights on, and I started leaving a kitchen radio on low overnight again, something to make ordinary noise. If whatever had moved through the yard wanted attention, it had never come back. The animals returned to their old rhythms. Snickers slept by the door like she always did. In the end, I had an explanation that let me sleep most nights. Human-made things had a habit of failing. The electrician had done her checks, the bulbs were fine, I had a manual override. It all satisfied logic. But the one frame, the overexposed blink on every camera before something blocked the lens, sat in a drawer in my head and refused to be filed away. I still watch the footage sometimes, late, when the rain starts and the windows fog. The clips are clean, mostly. Once in a while, I slow them to quarter speed and watch for that sweep of brightness. I keep thinking there's some simple answer. A reflective truck, a drone, a trick of wet air. Maybe that's what it was. Maybe nothing at all. Either way, the lights are on every night now, and the house feels like mine when I come in late. Door locked, radio low, dog asleep, a little more ordinary than the black one frame on the monitor. I was working night shift on Highway 58, just outside of Tehachapi. It was early March, around 2:30 in the morning, cold enough that the radio crackled a little every time I tried to adjust the volume. The stretch between Edison and Sand Canyon was dead quiet. Um, not a single car for miles. I'd pulled over at the turnout by mile marker 1 and 18 to sip some coffee and jot down notes for a minor accident report from earlier in the night. Dispatch came through with something simple: a possible abandoned vehicle on the eastbound side, about a mile and a half up from where I was. Caller said it was stopped on the shoulder with hazard lights flashing, but no one around. Normally that's nothing. Happens all the time. People pull off to rest or break down, someone else calls it in. I told dispatch I'd check it out. The road there cuts through a dry valley, just cracked dirt, scattered scrub, and low hills that block most of the horizon. No lights, no houses, no reason to stop unless you're desperate. As I came up the incline, I saw it. A silver Toyota Camry, parked just barely off the white line, hazards still blinking. It struck me how still everything looked. Usually hazard lights make the whole scene feel alive, flashing off signs, lighting up the road surface. But out there, it was like the light didn't bounce off anything. The air looked thick, maybe? Hazy? Hard to describe. I parked behind it, turned on my spotlight, and called it in. 1029 on California 8HJP 721, I said. A few seconds later, dispatch came back, registered to a Robert D. Cole, Bakersfield. No wants, no warrants. I stepped out, and the first thing I noticed was the smell. Ozone, faint but sharp, like after a lightning strike. The second thing was the warmth. The air around the car wasn't cold like the rest of the night. My breath had been fogging up until then, but as I got closer, it stopped. I touched the hood with the back of my hand. Warm. Not hot, but like it had been running recently. I checked the driver's door, unlocked. The interior light came on. Keys were still in the ignition. No sign of struggle, no blood, nothing obviously wrong. There was a phone in the cup holder, screen cracked, and an open water bottle in the console. Everything looked recent. What bothered me most, though, was the way the driver's seat was pushed back. Not like someone short had been driving. It was fully reclined. I radioed again. Dispatch, I've got the vehicle, appears unoccupied. Engine's off, but still warm. I'll check the perimeter. I walked around the car with my flashlight. That's when I saw it. A perfect circular mark in the asphalt, maybe 3 feet in diameter, about 2 feet off the passenger side. The edges were crisp, not like a burn from a tire or a flare, just a smooth, blackened circle. At first, I figured maybe the car had overheated, maybe a fluid leak ignited somehow, but the mark wasn't under the engine. It was off to the side on clean road surface. I crouched down to look closer. The asphalt wasn't melted exactly, but it was darker and slightly rougher, like it had been exposed to intense heat for just a second. No debris, no residue. I took a few photos with my phone and stepped back. My radio hissed suddenly. A burst of static, then went silent. I checked it, thinking maybe I bumped the channel, but it was still on the right frequency. I said, "Unit 24 to dispatch. Do you copy?" Nothing. Just that faint hiss again. I walked a few feet away from the car, tried again. Nothing. I even stepped toward the shoulder, facing the open valley, thinking maybe the hills were blocking the signal. Still nothing. Then, from somewhere in the distance, I don't know how far, I heard this low, pulsing hum. Not mechanical, not like an engine. It was steady, too low to pinpoint. It seemed to fade in and out like it was circling, but the sound didn't travel with the wind. I tried to tell myself it was a generator from a nearby farm, but there aren't any farms out there. Just desert. The hum stopped for maybe 10 seconds, and in that silence, I swear I heard a faint crackling like static electricity. The hairs on my arms stood up. When I turned back toward the car, something about the headlights caught my eye. They weren't on, I hadn't turned them on, but there was a faint glow reflecting in the chrome around them, like light was coming from somewhere behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing. Just empty road and hills. The glow faded a second later. That's when I realized the hazard lights had stopped blinking. Both had frozen mid-flash, one bright, one dark. I walked closer and noticed the rear lights looked dimmer than before, almost like the battery was dying, but the car still had enough juice to power the interior light. I backed away and tried my radio again. Finally, I heard dispatch come through. Faint, crackling, but there. Copy that. Unit 24. Say again your traffic. I told them I'd found the car unoccupied with what looked like heat damage to the pavement. They told me to stay put until another unit could reach me. I stood by the hood, keeping my flashlight on the circle in the road. The air still smelled metallic. Every few seconds, I thought I saw the edges of the circle shimmer a little, like heat waves on asphalt in summer. I even held my hand over it, didn't feel any warmth. About 10 minutes later, the other unit arrived, Officer Jimenez. As soon as his headlights came into view, I felt the air change again. It got cold all at once, like stepping out of a sauna. My breath came back visible again. He parked behind me, got out, and immediately asked, "You feel that?" I just nodded. We both walked over and I pointed out the burn mark. He crouched to look at it, touched the surface with a glove, and said, "Weird. It's not even hot." We went over the car again, checked the trunk, the back seat, the ditches. No sign of the driver. Jimenez took photos of the circle with his phone, too. I remember him saying, "Looks too clean to be from a flare. You said it was like that when you got here?" I told him yes, and that the car had been warm. When we were wrapping up, I noticed something small near the edge of the mark, a little black fragment like melted plastic. I picked it up with a pen and bagged it for evidence. It was weightless, brittle, smelled faintly like burnt copper. We had the car towed out at first light. The tow guy, a guy named Reggie I'd known for years, said the undercarriage looked fine. No burn damage underneath, no fluid leaks. Just a faint scorched patch on the passenger side fender, like a cigarette had been held there too long. I filed the report like any other abandoned vehicle. We tagged it as possible mechanical failure. The owner, Robert Cole, didn't answer his phone for 2 days. When he finally did, he told Bakersfield PD that he'd sold the car a week before to a guy who paid cash. No bill of sale, no contact info. A few weeks later, the evidence tech who'd examined that plastic fragment said it didn't match any automotive materials. They logged it as unknown polymer. The strangest part? When I went back to that stretch of highway a month later, just out of curiosity, the burn mark was gone. Completely. Asphalt looked brand new, like it had been resurfaced, but the county had no record of maintenance there. I still have the photos on my phone. The circle looks darker every time I look at it, like it's absorbing the light somehow. And every so often, when I'm on that same stretch of road at night, the radio will hiss for a few seconds, and the temperature in the cruiser will spike, just enough to make me glance at the shoulder, at nothing. I woke up around 3 in the morning to this low, steady static coming from the little radio on my nightstand. I hadn't left it on. I never do. It's an old shortwave receiver I keep by the bed, something I mess with sometimes when I can't sleep, just tuning through random frequencies, picking up weird chatter or air traffic. But I hadn't touched it in days. The static wasn't loud, just a faint hiss, like a weak signal drifting in and out. For a minute I lay there, half asleep, thinking maybe it had switched on by itself somehow. I reached over and flicked the power knob off. The static kept going. That woke me up fast. I stared at the radio, waiting for it to fade, but the sound didn't change. It wasn't coming from the speaker anymore. It was coming from outside. It had that same fuzzy texture, but softer, like it was mixed with the wind. I got out of bed and stood still for a few seconds, just listening. My room was dark, the only light coming from the faint orange glow of the street lamp outside. The sound seemed to be coming from the direction of my window, not inside the room, outside. I went over and pulled the curtain back. My house backs up to a small field that slopes down toward a tree line. At night, it's just pitch black, no lights at all, except for the road lamp near my driveway. Usually, I can hear frogs and crickets this time of year, but right then, there was nothing. No bugs, no wind, just that thin layer of static drifting through the air. I opened the window halfway. It was cool out, the kind of cold you feel more on your skin than in your breath. The static got clearer when I leaned out. It wasn't like a normal electrical noise. It had rhythm, uneven, like a faint signal trying to lock onto something. I stood there for a while, just listening. Then I noticed something else. Every few seconds, the sound would dip, almost like someone turning a dial. And during those dips, I thought I could hear another noise underneath. Tiny clicks or pops spaced evenly apart. Not mechanical, exactly, but deliberate. I turned my porch light on and stepped outside barefoot. The air smelled like rain, even though the sky was clear. The static was louder out there, coming from somewhere past the edge of the yard. The field behind my place is maybe 2 acres, surrounded by barbed wire and trees. There's nothing out there. No houses, no power lines, no equipment. Just grass and the old wooden fence that marks the boundary. But when I looked out toward the center of the field, I saw something reflecting faintly, like metal catching light. It wasn't bright, more like a dull sheen, easy to miss if you weren't staring straight at it. The shape was hard to make out. Roundish. Still, the static pulsed again. Each time it did, the reflection seemed to flicker with it. Not in sync, but close enough that my brain linked them. I walked down off the porch and crossed the yard slowly. The grass was wet with dew, and my feet were freezing, but I didn't really notice. I was just focused on that sound. It wasn't coming from the object itself. It felt like it was coming from the air around it. Halfway across the yard, I realized the static had changed. There was a low hum underneath now. It wasn't a tone I could identify, more like vibration through the ground. The closer I got, the more I felt it in my chest. Panic hit me for the first time then. I stopped walking and just stood there. Everything was too quiet, except for that noise. The air felt thick, like the kind of stillness before a storm, but heavier somehow. I turned around to look at my house. All the lights I'd left on, the porch, the lamp in my room, looked dimmer. Not flickering, just muted. Then the static cut out completely. Silence hit so suddenly it made me dizzy. I remember swallowing and hearing that tiny sound too loud in my own ears. For maybe 10 seconds, there was nothing. Then a single, short burst of static came again. Sharper this time, and something in the field shifted. It wasn't big, just a movement like something adjusting position. The reflection I'd been staring at slid slightly to the left, smooth and soundless. That's when I ran back toward the house. I didn't look behind me. I slammed the door, locked it, and stood there trying to hear anything over my heartbeat. But the sound didn't follow. I went to the window again, pulling the curtain aside just enough to peek out. The reflection was gone. The field looked empty, but the static had started again. Fainter now, coming from deeper in the trees. It faded gradually over the next few minutes until all I could hear were the frogs starting back up like whatever had happened was over and the world was rebooting itself. I stayed up the rest of the night. Didn't even try to sleep. Around 5, just before dawn, I went outside again. The grass where I'd walked was still wet, but out in the field there was a wide circle where the dew had dried up completely. The grass wasn't burned or flattened, just dry, like it had been warm there. I didn't step into it. I just stood at the fence watching the sun come up. Later that day, I checked the radio. It turned on fine, but every station had more static than usual. Even strong local ones were buried under faint noise. I unplugged it, thinking maybe it had picked up moisture somehow, but when I plugged it back in, I caught something weird. Right between frequencies, there was this short, repeating signal. 3 soft bursts, then a pause, then 2 more. It was so faint you had to lean in close to hear it. I recorded a bit on my phone, but when I played it back, there was nothing. Just silence. I didn't tell anyone. What was I supposed to say? That my radio picked up a sound that moved into my yard? That night, I left the radio unplugged. I sat up reading in the living room until after midnight, just waiting to see if the noise would start again. It didn't. Everything was normal. Around 2, I finally went to bed. The house was quiet, and I felt stupid for being on edge. I just started to doze off when I heard it again, very faint through the window. Not the static this time, just the clicking underneath it. 5 sharp clicks spaced perfectly apart, then silence. The next morning, I walked the field again. The dry circle was gone, but I noticed something else I hadn't before. Small impressions in the dirt near where the grass had been warm, not footprints. They were too shallow and evenly spaced, almost like marks from a tripod, except there were 4 of them, each about the size of a coffee mug base, sunk maybe half an inch. They didn't lead anywhere, just 4 marks in the shape of a square a few feet apart, right where I'd seen the reflection. I didn't sleep well the rest of that week. Every night I'd wake up around 3, listen hard, and hear nothing. But the silence never felt right, like there was something missing under it. On Thursday, I tried turning the radio back on again, just to check. Every station was clear. no static. But when I turned the tuning knob slowly across the bands, there was one spot right in between two frequencies where everything went dead quiet for a split second. Not static, not noise. Just total silence, sharp and absolute. And in that half second, before the static came back, I could have sworn I heard a faint hum, like something far off was matching the signal. Then it was gone. I unplugged the radio and put it in the closet. It's still there, covered with an old towel. I haven't heard the static since, but some nights, when the wind dies completely and the crickets stop for a few seconds, I'll catch myself straining to listen. It's not that I expect to hear it again. It's that sometimes, when everything gets quiet enough, it feels like I already do.